Okay. Ready when you guys are.
Madam Chair?
I think we are ready. So, Mr. Collier, would you like to read the preamble, or would you like me to?
Yes, I'll go ahead and read it. Good morning, everyone. In compliance with notification requirements of Ohio's open meeting law under COVID-19 emergency declaration, notice of this meeting has been publicly posted. All boards and commissions under the purview of the City Planning Department conducts its meetings according to Robert's Rules of Order. Actions during the meeting will be taken by voice vote. Abstentions from any vote due to a conflict of interest should be stated for the record prior to the taking of any vote. In order to ensure that everyone participating in the meeting have the opportunity to be heard, we ask that you use the raise hand feature before asking a question or making a comment. The raise hand feature can be found in the participants panel on the desktop and mobile version and activated by clicking the hand icon. Please wait for the chair or facilitator to recognize you and be sure to select unmute and announce yourself before you speak. When finished speaking, please lower your hand by clicking on the raise hand icon again and mute your microphone. We will also be utilizing the chat feature to communicate with participants. The chat feature can be activated by clicking the chat button located on the bottom of the WebEx screen. All meeting activity is being recorded via the WebEx platform. These proceedings are also being live streamed via YouTube for public view. We have provided a link to the meeting for those who wish to speak on a particular case via our website and email. We have also received emails from those who have provided written comment on a particular matter. Madam Chair, the meeting is yours.
Thank you. We'd like to call the August 13th Landmarks Commission meeting to order. It's nice to see everyone virtually. We would like to remind everyone, oh, it sounds like we have someone who might have two mics going, that to be respectful of all presenters, and please mute all your connections if you're not presenting. Mr. Secretary, could you please call roll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Ms. Bailey?
Here.
Mr. Kalikia? Mr. Collier?
Here.
Mr. Dreyer?
Here.
Mr. Harrison?
Here.
Mr. Jones? Mr. Strickland?
Here.
Mr. Tarasik? Ms. Trott?
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum. And for the record, we also in attendance are Carl Brunges and Julia LaPlaca from the Landmarks Commission staff, and Stuart Hastings from the Law Department.
Excellent, thank you. And we shall begin our Landmarks Commission meeting. Public hearings, we do not have anything scheduled today, so we'll move on to our certificates of appropriateness. We will begin with our first case on the agenda, which is located at 11001 Euclid Avenue, Severance Hall restoration, roof, solar panel, and window replacement. We'd like to ask the first presenter to come forward. Please use the raise hand function so that your microphone is unmuted and we can easily identify you. Just a reminder, the host will control your slides, so please state when you would like your slides advanced. And we just, once again, ask everyone else who's not presenting to please have your connections muted. Could the first applicant please come forward?
Okay. Hello. Can everyone hear me, first of all?
Yes.
Yes.
I saw some yeses and nodded heads. Great. My name is Todd Mayer. I am from DLR Group. We are the architect for this project. Also with us is Julie Crishone. She's the owner's representative for Severance Hall, as well as Andrew Lesnick from Donnelly's Construction. This project is the bonds renovation of Severance Hall. And what that is it's really a maintenance package for the Severance Hall. We did a master plan for Severance Hall several years ago, identified many areas where the building needs to be updated and improved. That included everything from the exterior to stuff on the interior, mechanical, electrical systems, performance systems, theatrical lighting. But what happened from that master plan was they pulled critical elements that are needed for the building to be maintained, to stay dry, to function for the future of those critical elements. And so in January, we did a further analysis of those specific items, looking at the building envelope, mechanical, electrical systems, and did another analysis that identified what was truly needed, what was prioritized scope items. And of that report, we identified about a little over $7 million in items that need to be addressed at Severance Hall. The bonds renovation is funding comes from the state, and the funding is available for this project is $5.3 million. So of the $7 million in scope items we identified in January, we found the most critical items that would fit within our budget. And of those, can you go to the next slide, please? Of those, the scope items has been broken down into roof and solar panels, building envelope, windows and doors, site improvements, mechanical and electrical upgrades, and the COVID-19 upgrades. When we did a report in January, we didn't have the COVID-19 upgrades, so that was another kind of curveball that we had to deal with. That took some funding from some other scope elements. But we do have, I think, a strong project to update this building to have it be used for the next 90 to 100 years. So we're not going to talk about the mechanical, electrical, or COVID-19 upgrades. We're really going to focus on what's with the exterior, the roof, envelope, windows, and site improvements. So next slide, please. First, I'm going to talk about the roof. The roof, most of the roof is a modified built-up roof. It was installed. There's two sections: the existing building, and then there was the addition in 1990s. Both had similar roofs, and the roof is at or near the end of its useful life in these areas. So we want to replace this roof. There's two other roof systems. You'll see the standing seam roof in the bottom left corner, and it's a flat metal seam roof on the right. If you go to the next slide, please. You can see where those roof areas are identified on this aerial plan. We are looking at replacing, again, the modified built-up roof in the sections, where it's identified as section 1. What we call the wedding cake roof, which is the main drum at the top. That's a flat seam metal roof that will not be replaced, but another clear sealant will be applied over top of that. About 10 years ago, the same sealant was applied to that metal roof, and it's held up for 10 years. There's some leaks on the south side, so we're going to recoat that entire metal roof for each of the two in this new clear coating that'll again prolong the life of that roof. The number 3 roof area, that's the metal standing seam roof, that's really the only roof plane that's visible from the street. That's in good condition. We're going to keep that as it is. And that should last for another, I would argue, another 10 to 20 years without significant maintenance or replacement. But the other roof areas, honestly, the sections where you're seeing the 1s and the 2, those are not visible from the street, but we are going to replace them. Let's go to the next slide. To kind of prove my point, you can see the roofs. These are not aerial, but street views of the building. The parapets cover a lot of the flat roofs, and then the wedding cake roof, you really can't see the profile of that flat roof. But even if you did, we're still putting a clear coat on it, so it's not going to be a major aesthetic change to what's there right now. What we are going to do with the roof, though, that is different from what's existing right now, is we're going to be adding solar panels. The Severance Hall would like to provide solar panels for more sustainable energy to to the facility. And we looked through with BT Solar, identified certain areas of the building that we could put solar panels on the roof that would have a very minimal or no visual impact at all. If we go to the next slide, please. The solar panels that we want to install are going to lie flat. They're going to be ballasted, so they're not going to be anchored into the structure. They're just going to be weighted down. They're going to lie along the flat areas of the roof next to the parapet wall. So the only area where we're going to have, and this diagram right here is kind of needs to be updated, but the solar panels on that middle section of the roof, there is no parapet on that wall, so we would need to pull the solar panels in from the sides of that middle section, so it has very minimal to no profile as viewed from the street or even from across the lagoon. But the solar panels that we're going to provide will provide up to 120,000 kilowatt hours of energy per year. It won't offset the entire building energy load, but we'll provide a dent and have a dent in the footprint, energy footprint of the building for years to come. Move on to the envelope. There's no questions. The building envelope, when I mentioned the building envelope, it's really the masonry of the building, because doors and windows are another element we'll discuss later. The building is primarily limestone and sandstone. The upper main section of the building is all limestone. That's in relatively good condition. Most of the stone is in pristine condition, doesn't need any repairs. There's some tuck pointing will occur, but not the entire building. What I think you need to really look at restoring and cleaning is going to be the sandstone. That's the lower base. You can see on the image on the right the significant difference between the discoloration of the sandstone at the base and what you're seeing at the limestone. The limestone we are going to clean. We do need to do some light cleaning. You can see at the corners at the top, some dirt is collected, so we want to remove that dirt. Again, it's just going to be, we anticipate just power wash would remove that. If we need to provide a cleaning product, it would be from Conproco, and again, we dilute the solution significantly, only apply it, increase it as needed to get the dirt off, but we are fairly confident we can remove it just with the spray wash. The sandstone, however, on the lower level, that might require more intensive work. I am going to reference the Garfield Monument project. This is the architect and the contractor who worked on the Garfield Monument, again, a sandstone structure. We have experience with the sandstone cleaning, and we apply the same techniques and lessons that we learned from the Garfield Monument to the sandstone base on the lower section of the Summers Hall. Further detailed issues with the envelope, again, there's a lot of cornices that have skyward-facing joints. All those joints will be replaced. You can see the joint on the upper left-hand corner image. That whole joint would be removed, cleaned out, and replaced with the ceiling joint. And you can see on the bottom left corner an image of the limestone wall. There are some areas, again, where we'll need to replace the mortar and tuck point. We'll find a mortar that matches the existing tuck point or the existing mortar as much as possible to replace that. And next slide, please. Again, this is I wanted to reference the Garfield Monument just because this shows the process that we went through to kind of get the final result we had with the Garfield Monument. And you guys were there too. You looked at this and watched over, so we had different cleaning methods tested and proved. And so this is part of that process, and we would apply that same process to the sandstone of the Summers Hall. Next slide, please. We're looking at the windows and the doors. The windows, many of them are original to the building. They're wood windows, painted, but the windows themselves are single pane, not very energy efficient. Acoustically, for a performance hall, there's a lot of sound transmission through these windows, and again, they need to be replaced. The windows in the 1990s edition, unfortunately, those have not aged well as well. So we're looking to replace those. We're looking at replacing almost all the windows on this building. and we're going to replace them with an aluminum thermally broken window with an insulated glazing unit. And that'll provide energy efficiency for the building, as well as increased acoustical performance for the building. We're not installing acoustical windows because, again, there's no performance spaces that are against the adjacent walls. But anytime you add an insulated glazing unit over a single pane, you're increasing the acoustical performance of that particular opening. The doors you're seeing at the center bottom image, those are doors at the entrances off of Euclid Avenue and off East Boulevard. Those doors, again, were from the 1990s edition. We're going to restore those doors. The paint has faded, so we're going to repaint the doors with a new elastomeric coating, and then repair the doors as needed. There's some sections of that trim are broken or cracked, so where there is trim that is broken or cracked, we're going to replace it and apply the same coating across all the doors and trim throughout those units. Next slide, please. So this is, again, the elevations. The blue are the windows that will be replaced. Again, a significant portion of these windows will be replaced. This is all from the most recent edition. All these windows, again, replaced. A lot of these windows are double hung windows. So we'll replace them with, again, a double hung window. The buttons will have the same pattern as existing, and we'll have because this is an insulated glazing unit, there's going to be a simulated divided glass that'll mimic the same button pattern and appearance that you're seeing with these windows. Next slide. Again, the blue color is the windows that we will replace. The orange are the doors that we will refinish. Again, this is the elevation off of Euclid Avenue. So you're seeing most of these are the original windows, and the section of the building to the far right of this image are the windows from the 1990s edition. Next slide, please. I would say one set of windows we are not replacing. Those would be the main plating windows in the front entrance. These are in better condition than the rest of the windows. Also, I mentioned the budget concerns from the first part of the project, our first part of the presentation. These were a far greater cost to replace than the rest of them. So we are not doing any work at these windows at this time. But again, as I mentioned, they're under a canopy. They've been protected, since the building was first built. So they're in much better condition than the rest of the building. So we're not going to touch these windows. We're going to leave them as they are. But you can see again from this image, the other two windows flanking this main entrance, those will be replaced. Next slide, please. And again, this is East Boulevard. It really just mimics the same scope of work that we saw on Euclid Boulevard, or Euclid Avenue, sorry. Windows replacements all across the whole elevation. The doors will be restored. The entrance to the original, or the entrance to the restaurant will remain as is. Next slide. So the product that we identified for the windows is going to be a Graham Architectural product windows system. They have a historical architectural window they have several products that are for historical architectural windows that are aluminum that have worked in many buildings across the United States. We are consulting with Jamison Ricca on this project as well. They're helping us with this project. Next slide, please. So the system that we identified that we want to use in this building is the 2500 series and the 1500 series. The really big difference between these two series of windows is the 2500 is a functional double hung window, whereas the 1500 is a simulated double hung window. Working with the owner and identifying certain windows that don't need to be double hung, don't need to be operable, but you still want that appearance. So you can get that fixed window, but with the look of a double hung window in the 1500 series. As a 2500, you still get the full functional performance of a double hung window. Next slide, please. This kind of shows the detail that you're seeing of the 1500 series, where it is fixed, but you do have that offset where the lower window is pushed back as if it were a double hung window. We would be applying trim on the exterior to mimic the wood molding and trims of the existing windows, but this would be an aluminum profile. You can see the mutton profile on the far right image there, where it would be a simulated divided light, but you would see the the form, the profile, a similar profile of the wood, but it would be expressed in the aluminum mutton on the exterior side of the window. I think the last thing we'll talk about is site work. I think, again, if we had full budget, we'd do a lot more site work, but, we focused on getting the building dry as much as possible. So the elements that we're looking at the site right now, again, this is an aerial, the entrances off of Euclid Avenue and East Boulevard, where we have those doors that are going to be refinished. Those existing patios or existing walkways, they're a paver system that's breaking up, and there's some grates that are not ADA accessible. The accessible entrance to the building is off Euclid Avenue, and there are a couple of grates that have wide openings, so we've replaced those grates with more with ADA accessible approved grates for drainage. Then replace the pavers with concrete. Number two, the area number two, that's a section of the plaza or patio, and directly in front of Severance Hall. That section is currently concrete. It's cracked in enough places where we're just going to replace the entire section of concrete with new. And when you're seeing the section, the number three areas, those are just several areas around the building that will be patched with new concrete. Again, a couple cracks here and there that don't necessitate full replacement of concrete. We're just going to patch and repair those areas. Next slide, please. This is just a close-up of some of the images that have been scoped. And when I'm talking about the items for scope item 3, just the concrete repair. Again, a few cracks in some of the paved areas. The terrace on the number 3, we're going to replace some of the concrete. Again, that's just looking at you can see the grate there. There's concrete that's chipped away that needs to be replaced. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about simple concrete replacement. Item area 2, there's cracks and heaving concrete throughout the entire plaza. So we're just going to, by the time you replace all those cracks, you're almost replacing the entire plaza anyway. So that's just going to be a full repair. And then item number 1, you can see the pavers that will be replaced with concrete. I think that's the end of our presentation. So I guess we'll open it up to questions.
Excellent, thank you. Is there anyone here from the local design review committee to present the committee?
Madam Chair, I don't think anyone's here from the committee. This was reviewed on August 6th by the Euclid Corridor Design Review Committee. They approved it with one condition, that the solar panels not be visible from the street view.
Madam Chair, we have Mr. Harrison with his hand raised.
Okay, we will move on to commission discussion. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation. It was very thorough and very well presented. Thank you very much. And I do have a couple of questions. So I think in projects like this, it's very helpful for us as a commission to learn from this degradation and deterioration. And so can you tell us how long, again, the roof sections that you intend to replace, how long they were in service?
19 years is the number that sticks out in my head.
That doesn't seem very long. Can you attribute that deterioration to any mistakes or any kind of was it the wrong product to use? Was it?
No, I mean, we just, I don't know if it was the wrong product. We're going to replace it with a single ply membrane roof. that EPDM is going to go with. So we're going to replace the roof system to go with something that's more easier to manage and maintain than what's there right now.
Okay.
Madam Chair, we have one of the, I believe the owner representative would like to make a comment, Julie Crishon.
Yes, this is Julie Crishon. I just wanted to comment that with the roof that is being replaced, it was a 20-year product that was selected at the point in time that fit the budget that, Severance made the decision for back in the 99 renovation. So it is at the end of its useful life. And so I just wanted to comment that the selection at that point in time was a decent roof, but it was a 20-year product.
And how about the roof that you're putting back on? What is the lifespan of that roof expected to be?
Todd, can you speak to the product? I believe it's also a 20-year product, isn't it?
Yeah, and I have a 20-year warranty on it.
Which is
Okay.
the typical warranty length of the roof.
Yeah. It's
Most
a,
of these products.
Sure, but I mean, you might expect that it would last a bit longer, or instead of, collapsing at year 19. But anyway, that seems unfortunate in my view, particularly with a building that's owned and occupied by a nonprofit institution. Also, I'd like to ask about the concrete on the terrace. When was that put in, and how long did that last?
Todd, you want to take that one? Or I know that the concrete, oh, go ahead.
No, Julie, I was hoping you could answer that because I don't know when it was installed, to be honest. I would argue from when it was originally installed. And
the terrace concrete, the wraparound at the belt line, I know that that's likely to be original. The concrete at the front grand stairs that you're seeing in this picture was redone in the 1999 edition. And again, as much as we would like to have no maintenance on buildings, believe me, as a nonprofit, Severance is very interested in longevity. However, we use the best products that we can for the cost with longevity in mind, but there's just maintenance that's required on these surfaces over time. And there's been some wear on the concrete, particularly due to the de-icing materials that have been used at Severance. And I'm sorry?
No, when you mentioned de-icing, I wondered about that. So
Yeah. So they have changed products over the years, but it's just that historically there was some damage done to the building. And on the prior major renovation that they had in 99, a lot of the focus was on the new addition, and some of the maintenance work, unfortunately, at that point in time was deferred. And it's always been Musical Arts' intent to get back to the restoration of the exterior of the building, and now we have the funds to do that. So that's what we're forging ahead with at this point.
okay, thank you very much.
Madam Chair, we have Adrian and Mr. Strickland with their hands raised.
Go ahead, Ms. Bailey.
Good morning. Again, I like the presentation. It was well presented with information in detail. I just want to get a better understanding from the architect and the owner, but what we both knowing is just to do the roof in the building elevation, because you mentioned earlier you wanted to make sure you get the building dry. Is that correct?
yeah.
Okay. All right. Because I had a question about the parapet. So the parapet you did show it's going to be part of the building on an envelope that's going to be tucked on, because I saw a few of those. But I do have a question about the solar system. I like what you stated, that it won't be penetrating the existing roof, but can you explain in detail how it's going to be? Like, for example, in the metal sim area, are you going to put the solar panel there? Are you going to use the existing framing from the metal system to place it, or is this something that's going to place directly on the roof? And how you going to control the movement, by it being up in the air, winds and stuff. So, it won't be doing too much movement if you're not going to do penetration on the system.
This is a ballasting system that has been used in many buildings in the Cleveland area. And the way it functions is you have the solar panel itself sits in a framework that is weighted down, looks like a kind of a concrete block. And so those rest on top of the roof membrane, so you're not penetrating that roof membrane every time you want to anchor the system into the roof. And it's a very effective system for the roof membrane, and the panels themselves are weighted down enough to the point where uplift from the wind do not take these panels off of the roof. They're anchored, they're just weighted down.
I just sent an email asking it. Yeah, okay. So this is the system right here. So go ahead. So it's just,
you can see sorry, in the foreground of those panels, those would be the weights that occur at every single one of the panel locations that kind of weigh down the whole system.
so you're saying that the weight of the system, by again being up high up in the air on the roof, it's also going to control the wind. Hopefully, very high winds and things like that. So you're saying that's going to control all that, the weight of the system.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Nice system. All right.
Madam Chair, we have Mr. Strickland, with his hand raised.
Go ahead, Mr. Strickland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have two questions. There's a terrace section that is currently pavers, and I wanted to know if the intent was for the new concrete system to have a joint pattern that would replicate the paver pattern. And my second question was on the Garfield Memorial Project. We had an opportunity to review several of the replacement mortar samples. And I wondered if we would have a similar opportunity for this project to weigh in on the actual replacement mortar samples.
With let me address the paver replacement real quickly. Those pavers, I think, are there might be a 6-inch paver square. So I do not anticipate a score line on the concrete that tight, but we would have some sort of score line control joints in the concrete that I would argue reflect a border that we have with the pavers, but also kind of reflect the architecture. If you're pulling some score lines that come off of the mullions of the doors, we would look at doing something like that. As far as Garfield goes, the mortar replacement, yes, you're welcome to review the mortar at this project. Just a caveat: the mortar at Garfield, we replaced all of the mortar in that building, and I think we were studying which mortar we should replace, because there were a variety of different mortar colors that were on the building, because again it had been replaced in sections over time throughout the life of that building. So we reviewed. I tried to identify at Garfield an example of the original mortar, and we looked at samples that best matched that original sample that we thought was original to the building. With Severance Hall, we are not going to replace 100% of the mortar. I think we're estimating right now maybe 30-40% replacement of the mortar. So we're going to try and find mortar that is most prominent on the building and try to match that, just so there's greater consistency throughout the building. Again, Severance Hall has had tuck pointing done throughout the life of this building as well. So there's inconsistency in the mortar colors throughout. So we'll try and find the predominant mortar color of the building and match that.
Okay, that makes sense. So I think it would be preferable for us to to have you produce a sample panel with any different watercolor considerations that you're looking at. So we have an opportunity to weigh in on that as well, especially, as you say, if the building's been tuck pointed several different times. I'm sure there's several different watercolors. So we'd like to weigh in on what you finally settle on as the appropriate replacement color. Can you tell me typically what the joint size is between the sandstone and the limestone?
The limestone has a tighter joint, maybe 1/4 inch to 3/8, whereas the sandstone joint size might be more 3/8 to 1/2 inch in most areas.
Yeah, so those joint sizes, I would say, are considerably smaller than what we saw at Garfield Memorial. So
yes,
it's probably less predominant in this joint pattern anyway. All right, so just communicate with Don when those sample panels might be ready, and I'm sure he'll send an invitation out for us to have an opportunity to review them. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, we now have Mr. Harrison with his hand raised.
Go ahead, Mr. Harrison.
Yes, I just had one more question, and that's about the window replacement. I think, and replacing so many original windows is fairly, well, troubling to me, but maybe not to others. But in any event, I appreciate that you've researched and found a product that seems to replicate from a distance the look of these windows. The problem is, of course, that when you're next to the building, an aluminum window looks nothing like the elegance of an original wooden window. So I would like to know, please, because you mentioned that they're an acoustical bleed at the moment. None of these windows, of course, are anywhere near the concert hall. So how and why do you feel that this is really and truly very necessary, other than from an efficiency standpoint?
Well, I think efficiency is a reason why they need to be replaced. I think also the maintenance, you can see the windows, there's cracks peeling, so it's another maintenance issue for the owner. There is again, Cleveland Orchestra, I think we all know is one of the best in the world, and they will take any acoustical performance betterment of the building that they can take. I think when I started the project, I was told, their level of quality is, they can hear a mouse poop on a cotton ball, I think is what I was, the standards I was told to be holding to. So I think anytime you can improve the acoustical performance of a performing arts center like this, it's certainly a benefit, and you should look into that. And yeah, I think, again, energy performance is still something we need to look at for the owner, for the maintenance of the building, for the long-term longevity of the building, so that don't have to replace these windows again in the near future.
Madam Chair,
I don't think that you would. I mean, they've lasted 90 years, first of all, and the Cleveland Orchestra has never suffered as a result of it. So I take that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because this is an historic building. It's not a new concert hall, and therefore, there are historic considerations that need to be made, architectural considerations that need to be made, and this is a wholesale replacement of, except for the Palladian windows in front, of the original fabric. And so the Landmarks Commission, I think, has a responsibility to ask these questions and to understand exactly how deep the need is to do such a wholesale replacement of original fabric. You're not replacing all the tuck pointing, for example, and that clearly needs maintenance. You're not replacing every roof. That clearly still needs maintenance. So every bit of this building will need maintenance. And so I think that we sometimes blithely just go toward replacement of historic windows, when in fact, I question the need sometimes. So I'm still pondering that aspect of this project.
Madam Chair, Julie Krishan, did you have a response to that as well?
Yes, I just wanted to say that since the renovation and even before, it's always been the primary concern of musical arts to adhere to and preserve the quality and the architectural distinction of Severance Hall. I think that we've been very careful in finding the right profile and the right window. I think DLR has gone to great extents to not just put in any aluminum window. On the renovation, which I was the architect involved with the architect of record back then, we went with the wood window because we were matching what was existing. And in putting back a product that was antiquated in technology to what was available in the 1930s, we actually did have breaches on the interior. There's been a lot of interior damage because of water leaking through the windows over time, and there has been air infiltration. There has been acoustical issues. Surprisingly, we have a lot of ambulances that go up Euclid Avenue, and there have been acoustical issues in the hall. So as Todd mentioned, the music director is very sensitive to these issues, and we're always doing what we can to improve the quality experience, as well as preserving the beauty and history of Severance Hall. So just wanted to let you know that where there is new technology that can be incorporated in a sensitive way, you know, that is the direction that we are trying to keep.
Okay, that helps a great deal, and I really appreciate your response. And so knowing that and reminding us of the very loud Cleveland ambulances, I can appreciate that very much. So thank you very much.
Madam Chair, we have no other hands raised at this point. Oh, I take that back. We have Ms. Bailey.
There was a comment made about leaks coming through the window. So my question again is, we're not voting on the windows, correct? Or is it part of the building envelope?
We are voting on windows.
We are voted on the windows. Okay.
Any additional questions, Ms. Bailey? Or is that your question?
That was it.
Okay.
Madam Chair, we now have Mr. Pettit.
I'm just going to ask one question since and I haven't heard it answered and maybe I missed it. What is the color of the windows, the new aluminum clad windows? Will they match the existing?
They will match. The manufacturer has a set of standard colors, and none of them really come close to this. So it'll be a custom color. And again, as you can see in the image on the on the right, we'll need probably identify paint that matches the color near the upper top of the window. If you look at the paint colors that are closer to the sill, that paint has been faded. So we're probably going to be looking at a color that's more in line with the colors of the windows you're seeing near the top, near the head of the window.
And the doors, will the repainting of the aluminum doors, will they also match the windows, or will they stay more of a natural aluminum color?
It will match the windows.
Okay. And will the brick molds be maintained or replicated in the window replacements?
They will use a brick mold from the manufacturers. They have dozens of brick molds that are available, and we'll find one that's closer matching to the one that's at the existing windows right now.
Okay. Well, I personally think in knowing the musical arts and the care that they take on this facility, I think it's a very respectful restoration, knowing that I agree with Mr. Harrison. No one likes to replace windows, but these windows have lasted 90 years, and the orchestra has thrived and done the best that they could with the windows they have. So I think it's a very respectful restoration of the windows and roof. And I really appreciate the musical arts really pushing the envelope on the environment and trying to incorporate solar panels and improve the building performance, knowing that they are a nonprofit and funds are always limited towards building maintenance. So I think it's a very nice proposal. Go ahead, Mr. Pettit.
That's all right. You stole my question, so I'm good.
Okay. Are there any other more questions from the commission, or would someone like to put forward a motion?
We have Ms. Bailey.
I propose the motion. That's why I was asking question, what was part of the, what I'll be making the motion on. I approve the motion is to approve as presented, with samples of the waters presented to staff for approval. And that's all that I have, unless it's something I missed.
Madam Chair, Mr. Harrison.
I just want a second. Just want a second, though.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Further discussion, go ahead. That was why your hand was raised, Mr. Harrison?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? No? Mr. Secretary, could you please call roll and announce the results?
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Ms. Bailey,
Yes.
Director Collier,
Absolutely, yes.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
What is the timing? One last question. What's the timing of the restoration? Is it going to happen before the end of the year or wait until the spring?
Yes, we'll be starting with some of the work. Actually, some of the COVID-related work has already been started now, but later this winter and early in the spring through spring of 2022.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for your presentation. We look forward to seeing the restoration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move on to our second applicant, located at 2814 Detroit Avenue, the Cohatch, Ohio brick paint color. Could the applicant please come forward and use the raised hand function so we can unmute your mics?
Madam Chair, Mr. Pettit did have his hand raised. Do you have something?
Yes, Madam Chair, I just wanted to introduce this item on the agenda today. The commission did approve this project on June 25th with a couple of conditions, and one of them was that they restudy the color of the brick on the front portion of the project. We exchanged a couple of emails in July. Essentially, none of our suggestions were suitable for the applicant. I shared them with Mr. Harrison. The applicant is back today to offer some other options, and hopefully we can come to some resolution on the color of the brick. So that's why we're back today.
Thank you for that context.
And it looks like we have Mr. Bowen and Mr. Watkins.
Thank you, Landmarks. There's three colors, and you've seen parts of these before. The architect, Tim Lai, is not able to come, so I guess I'm presenting these today. The first one was the original color, which was the urban bronze. This shows it on an older building. It shows it on the rendering. It shows it next to the brick color, the Core-10 steel, and the painted metals. Next slide, please. And this is in order of the owner's preference, too, I should say. The second color is the Westchester gray. It also shows it on a structure. It shows it on the rendering, and next to the brick color, the Corten steel and the painted metal. Both these grays, one's lighter than the other, and they're both in a warm hue. And then next slide, please. The last is the Stillwater, which has a green cast to it. Also, this is a warmer color. All of them are the amount of contrast that the owner's looking for, and it's next to the red brick, the Corten steel, and the painted metal trim. So these are the three that between the owner and the architect, they felt reinforced the owner's brand. They believe they like all three of these colors, and they thought that it fit well within the community it resides in. So we would ask if the Landmarks Commission had a preference, and probably during this process, as you know, we spent a lot of time with community engagement, block clubs, and design review. And you know, when it comes to colors, especially when you paint brick, you know, there's a diversity of that. There's a lot of people that prefer the first one from the neighborhood block club and design review. And obviously it's Landmarks that makes the ultimate decision. So that's why we're back with these three colors, and look for your input.
Madam Chair, we have Director Collier with his hand raised.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yes.
Collier.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, fellow commissioners. A couple of things I want to hit on with respect to the project overall, as well as the brick color scenario. Given the nature of the uses inside the building, I totally understand the project's inception. I have a very distinct color on that front building, and for me, it made a lot of sense. With respect to the historic color palette that one of my fellow commission members brought up at the previous meeting, I think, you know, going back and taking that into consideration and coming up with different approaches to addressing that building, I appreciate the applicants for doing that. From my position, I think this project is extremely important to get done, and would encourage us to make a determination today. My personal opinion with respect to this kind of mirrors the original conversation about this project with respect to its color. I think that there needs to be a definite distinction. I would err on the side of the second color that was shown. I think that the lighter it is, I think you get that distinction. And at the same time, you don't deviate grossly from the historic color that was there before. I know it's not the same, but I think that we have to evolve. And I think that this Westchester gray is a very conservative color. Also, if you look at the project across the street, this kind of a gray or charcoal color palette is actually picked up on with Church and State as I look at that building going up there. So for me, I've always been okay with what was proposed originally, but given the issues that were raised and the applicant going back and looking at some things, I think this is a pretty good balance here with the Westchester gray. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. Other questions or comments from commission? So I'm assuming this did not go back to local, correct? Everything stopped. Was it commission feedback?
Correct. It did not go back to the local committee.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Mr. Watkins did have his hand raised. Did you need to make a comment, sir?
No, David covered it well. I would just say that, you know, we really want to be respectful to the origins of the building, and we believe that all three colors are respectful to the industrial look of the building, industrial history of the building, as well as sensitive to the needs of the neighbors and the community in which we'll be operating.
Madam Chair, we have Mr. Harrison.
Go ahead, Mr. Harrison.
Could I see all three colors once more, please? Right. Okay. The building dates to the first quarter of the 20th century, or maybe right at 1900 to the to the first quarter of the 20th century. And the third color is a color that, you know, is more appropriate to that period, because there was a lot of sort of jewel tones that were used in coloring from the 1890s through about 1920. And so you get a little bit of blue in this, which brings to mind that late 19th, early 20th century palette. However, I'm not sure that it really goes well with the other color scheme of the buildings. So, and I still think that the urbane bronze is too dark and not appropriate to an early 20th century building. So, and the gray I find anemic. So, but that's my personal opinion. I think the most historic color of these three is the third. So that's just what I would like to add. And I don't know how I will vote at this point.
Madam Chair, we have no other hands raised. Mr. Strickland, is that from previous case?
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that.
No problem. Just don't want to miss you.
Other
I
questions or
have
comments?
my microphone unmuted. I might as well weigh in. Mr. Harrison providing that historical context, I think, is very helpful. So if a motion is going to be put forward, I would go for the Stillwater color.
And just so you know, I just want to weigh back in. Remember, I was okay from the outset. So I'm okay with that third option, given Mr. Harrison's historic context. So.
Other questions or comments from the commission?
Mr. Harrison again.
Will you entertain a motion? Oh no, I'm sorry, Ms. Bailey had a question, so I will withdraw.
Oh, I don't have a question, but you can do the motion. I was going to do the motion.
Oh, all right. Well, I propose that we accept this proposal. I move that we accept this proposal using still water as the color.
And I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Further discussion? I guess the only comment I would make is that I think and appreciate the architect and owner going back and studying this, because I think what you've brought back is are all appropriate solutions and based on the context. I appreciate you listening and being flexible to our feedback. So we have a motion, we have a second. Any other discussion? Mr. Secretary, could you call roll and announce the results?
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Ms. Bailey, Ms. Bailey, you're muted.
Oh, God.
You're unmuted now.
No, you're not. Go ahead.
Am I mute?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, yes.
Thank you. Director Collier,
Absolutely. Yes.
Mr. Dreyer,
Yes.
Mr. Harrison,
Yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik,
Yes.
Ms. Trott.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's time and consideration to this project.
Thank you. We look
Madam
forward to seeing
Chairman,
you
Commission
soon.
members, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be a part of the community in Ohio City, and we're hoping to begin construction in October and open in late spring, early summer of next year.
Excellent. Well, thank you, and we look forward to seeing your project move forward.
Thank you very much.
That concludes our certificates of appropriateness for today. We'll move on to concept plans. We have one on the agenda today. It's located at West 28th Street and Church Avenue. It's a new construction of Live Work Longhouse. The applicant, please use your raise hand function and tell us about your project.
Madam Chair, looks like we have Graham, and I'm not going to pronounce your last name because I don't want to destroy it.
It's like a V and a Z. VZ.
Easy. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, commissioners and staff. We're excited to share with you the longhouses at Hingetown. If we could have the second slide.
Is that the one?
I'm just seeing it as concept plan and textual. Show the
Sometimes it takes a few seconds, but it is on the one with the large elevation.
Okay, if you just proceed one more slide where it's exactly the render. This will be helpful in terms of both your neighborhood context and also visuals, because obviously this is a unique project to Cleveland and this neighborhood. These are 7 different Quonset huts. We're calling them longhouses. At first, we were a bit cautious in terms of cultural appropriation, but the term Quonsets for the village and not a native village, the village that these structures were first pioneered and the Army base that it did so. You've got to the right is 28th, and then to the left of the render is Church Avenue. And what's really unique about this corner is you've got the church building, which is, you can see the 5 stories and then the 6th floor balcony railing. You've got to the right, you're peeking beyond the range of the 4 longhouses that face 28. You've got the 1865 print shop, which was originally the Eagle Hotel. So you've got that historic building with its arched windows. And then you've got what we call the Flying Tiger Pizza Building, which is a 1-story CMU structure that was built in the 1980s with Michaela Pici, an Italian artist currently living in Berlin. And that's her piece on the side. And then you've got Mike Sobek's piece. And I'll ask the commission as a trivia question, what pizza, local pizza company that pizza's depicting. But you've got these variously positioned structures that have remarkable texture, but it's within a corner where you have these 3 topographies and you have multiple different shapes. So you've got the extruding white planks on Church and State with the 0 plane of the Spanish slate, the entirety of the wall. And if you want to progress to the next slide so we can see a site plan, this will be a little bit more helpful, but I wanted to give visual context of this.
Maybe one more.
And Marika is also my partner, not only in these projects, but also in life. I'm only seeing the render still, so it's still looking okay. So, and if you progress one more slide, we can actually see the layout of the 7. You can see how they fit. The entirety of Church and State, so that property line behind parcel AA down, that's the ramp down to the underground parking. There'll be a vehicular alley there. Again, this is some of that neighborhood context. Keep moving. I'm looking for, it would be slide 6 in the deck.
There we go.
So it's a slide after the context photo.
Yep, it's on there. It's just in a second.
Perfect.
Technology is wonderful.
So we're using, for the vehicular lane, we're using the pavers that have grass that come through it, the permeable pavers, so that you've got, again, more texture on there. So don't think of a black top that cuts through the property, but that whole wall to the west is where there's the ramp down of Church and State. So we're trying to create a little bit of space between. It's a natural alley, and then you've got the 7 structures in different lengths. The heights of them slightly different. We'll get to that, but you can see the existing 1-story structure and the existing 3-story structure. So you've got a lot of these shapes happening. But the intent of this is it's live workspace, as a chairperson said, but we want to have that flexibility, and they'll be the most affordable new construction. So where we're looking at about $1.50 per square foot. We've already had interest from, there's a musician who wants to use this studio space, to a painter who's looking to get outside of their confines, because you've got the double height ceilings in some areas. If you want to progress to the next slide, please. You can see the layouts. Each of them have a full bathroom, a kitchen setup, and they were inspired very much so by a project in Detroit called True North, which was done by Prince Concepts, but it was Ed Chan's studio that was the architect for it. You can progress to the next slide to see those True North pictures, but also get an elevation to give you a sense of how it's interacting with the building that's sharing 28. So we're also proposing that we're enlarging the windows on the Flying Tiger building, and it won't impact the Flying Tiger mural. And then from a material standpoint, the dark shade is a polycarbonate, and then you've got clear glazing as the second floor windows, and then also first floor windows. And then we're using the same cedar material that is clad the entire first floor of Church and State, and also the same cylindric up-down lights too. So we're borrowing some of the elements from next door to create a little bit of interaction there. You can see how True North in Detroit is presented on the bottom. We think we've got a more elegant approach with how we're treating the end caps for this, and also allowing for more light to be shown. The next slide's going to show you one of the elevations of the 1865 building, which has been before this commission, but then how we're reworking the front to make it to more of a retail experience. But because local design review, asked to have a clear material list, we are going back to them. But just so that this commission's aware, you can see the enlarged windows on the bottom elevation. We're adding a glass man or person door there, and then we're wrapping. We're putting in factory windows, additional glazing. We're doing a porcelain tile that Marika, you talk to the gooseneck. It'll feel more kind of a Bakersfield type approach, if anyone's familiar with that building on 25th Street, than the current pink drive-it that is right on Detroit. And so the idea is eliminate the mirrored glass block of the 1980s and you really glassify this front. We've got Premier Barber in one of these storefronts. We've got Haven Nail Studio in the other. And the goal is to create that retail experience along Detroit. And you try to take what was a very 1980s project and put some natural light into it and carry that corner. Right now, there's just a column on the corner of 29th and Detroit. So we'll actually hard corner the building with a column. Jumping back to the longhouses, here's some additional elevations. If you go to the next slide, please. So this gives a better sense of the end caps and the polycarbonate that's being used. And then you also see the ribbed nature of the galvanized steel, which from the new neighbors that have already moved into the state building, they'll be looking on a range of these very sculptural structures. So there's going to be a real nice texture for the new neighbors in the church building. You won't crowd the 1865 print shop. You'll be able to see that building from church, from 28th. We don't want to take the approach of building lot line to lot line, and we think this is an appropriately dense and keeps the creative momentum that we find in this neighborhood. And then Marika can talk a little bit about these through lines, and Graydon also, who's our architect, can talk through it too. But that notion is that you've got these clear glass that's going through the buildings into this commons that are in between all 7 of the longhouses.
Yeah, and each of the, I think Graham mentioned, each of these longhouses also has a partial mezzanine level, which we think will be a really nice, unique feature for these floor plans. I don't know what slide the floor plans were. Basically, we've tried to keep these spaces in the interiors as open as possible. Just to, as Graham mentioned, we're interested in them being very flexible live workspaces, and so we want to keep them as flexible as possible for whatever kinds of uses people might want to use them for. So yeah, you can see here we just have very simple pared down kitchens and bathrooms, but they are full ADA kitchens and bathrooms. We have essentially a long bar of the kitchen and bathroom tucked to one side, and then hiding a linear staircase that heads up to the mezzanine level. And you can see the dotted lines show the line of the mezzanine. So basically there would be an upper level that if it was a residence, somebody might use that as their, bedroom, or somebody might use it as an office. And then there is a really nice double height space essentially on the left side of these plans. So then people will have that really nice double height living space. And then, as Graham mentioned, we've tried to orient the some of the windows so that you can see, you get sight lines all the way through the buildings. Each unit has access on both sides. So we were really just trying to make these very open, flexible spaces that can be used in a number of ways, and kind of clustered around a central court to create sort of a small creative community. So that's kind of the goal.
And just the two deviations from the end caps are the two types that one of them we wanted to make sure that we weren't turning our back on church. And so you've got glazing that we're putting in the middle of the church, the building that's parallel with church. So that 7F on the site plan. And then also for the building that's facing, so you can see that 7E actually on that lower elevation. And then on the commons, which is probably the best slide to look at, is slide 6, which is the site plan. You can see that there are doors going out to the commons for that 2B structure as well. And one of the feedback from the local design review that we're going back to the most detailed, but is the landscaping plan, which we're excited to add additional texture with river birch, which we just love river birch, lavender, Carl Forester. Those are the plant materials that we're amped to use. And I'm sure, Maurice, if there's any possibility for Graydon to share a screen, but there's an additional detailing that he has put up post the local designer review's feedback last week, just to fill in some knowledge. Not sure if it's possible for Graydon to raise his hand and ask for.
Yeah, we're not doing any additional screen sharing.
That's fine. So,
If you want to email it to me, I could throw it up there real quick.
Okay.
Braden, can you email that to him?
Yeah, unless Maria, anything else that.
Well, just to say, also on the left side, we're proposing 7 off-street parking spaces. You can see there's a narrow drive to the left, and we have 7 parallel spaces. We've also tucked the dumpsters back against the 3-story Schaefer printing building. So it's all the way back towards the existing 3-story building. And then we have a very tight traffic turnaround here so that cars then can make this turnaround and drive out onto Church Avenue. We're not contemplating any fencing or anything like that on this project. We want it to feel open to the neighborhood. So you can see all these, some of the red arrows on this site plan just showing that, I think that this common space in the middle will probably just by its nature feel like a mostly private space for the tenants, but we want it to be a space that is open and accessible to the public, especially, should somebody want to do something, an open studio night or something like that, that there's the availability for the public to also come into that interior space.
And the fun part about using the pavers, with grass for the vehicular, both the parking and the drive, and it's the amulet cobblestone that really adds that fun texture. But and then also show people that approach right there. But that can then also be utilized if there's an event that warrants larger gathering space. We can flex it. It doesn't feel like you're on a runway either.
I've emailed.
Madam Chair, we have Director Collier has his hand raised.
Can we go back to the rendering maybe just I think it's a good image to land on.
And the extra materials have been sent to Mr. Rulins.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't we see those materials while you're pulling that? Was there feedback from the local design review committee? You want to talk about that quickly? Is there someone here from local design who can tell us and presents the committee report?
Madam Chair, there's no one here from the staff at Ohio City, although I believe Margaret Land is here, who is one of the committee members. Last week, the Design Review Committee recommended approval as presented. with the requirement that landscaping plans should be reviewed at a later date. And there's also a note that several committee members asserted that the extremely varied context of the height, density, and style of surrounding buildings in this case allows for a more creative approach to building type in this location. So they did approve it. We put it on the agenda today as a concept plan. Staff is we have mixed feelings about it. Although I generally support the idea that this is an innovative and creative new building type. This is something new under the sun that we've never seen before. I'm still trying to get my head around it in terms of use and longevity and sustainability, but I'm willing to give it a chance. I would also like to point out that this will require several variances from the Board of Zoning Appeals, including a conditional use from the City Planning Commission.
Madam Chair, Carl Brunges had his hand up momentarily. Oh, and Mr. Collier.
Yeah, it's okay. So obviously this is the Landmarks Commission. So the first reaction to something that's this innovative is whoa. But whoa is good. I think Cleveland needs a lot more whoa type of projects. I want to talk about this in the context of what was presented. So there was the actual building fronting on Detroit. And then from a district perspective, it's this actual proposal that we're seeing on the screen now. With respect to the actual building that's fronting on Detroit, I didn't see any issues. I think that removal of the glass block is a definite improvement with respect to really glazing that up and opening that up, given the fact that there's so much development activity that's happening on Detroit. And we know that post-COVID, people are going to be moving and walking and interacting with the street. So that's number one. I think that building on Detroit is done pretty well with respect to respecting the history and the heritage. From a district perspective, obviously this is something that's totally different. And, I was shocked when I saw this because I said to myself, who's going to be beating down the door to want to develop a high density structure on this corner, and then when I look and I see this and I say to myself, one of our goals with respect to housing, our comprehensive plan is housing diversity and creating housing that actually serve different lifestyles and preferences of all Cleveland residents. So when you look at it through that sort of general lens, I say to myself, this is definitely provides another type or another element to the mix in our neighborhoods. And I find it very interesting. Like Don, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it a little bit from a design standpoint, because it's a very unique design. The notion of having these smaller units on one particular parcel, I think is very interesting. I watch a lot of HGTV and other things like that, and I find a lot of what I see very intriguing. And I think about the 21st century and where we're moving to be more practical, more sustainable. All of those things started to come back into mind when I saw this. So I find it extremely innovative, obviously. I think it's extremely interesting. I think too, with 28th Street in this particular block, given the scale of the block from 28th Street, where you have the mural and you have the one-story structure, I think that's the thing that kind of gets me over the hump with the scale of this. Right? It doesn't depart grossly from what's there on that block of 28. But as you approach Detroit, obviously you have a much taller sort of building scenario. And then when you look at what's going on in this block, where you have Church 28th and you have the street where Saucy Brew Works is, this is becoming a enclave of eclectic building types, a atmosphere where you can really feel engaged in the urban experience. and it's starting to become a very unique space, I think, in the city of Cleveland. So, I would venture, to say, if in fact we're going to do things that kind of stretch us, this is the type of district to do it in, just given everything that's happening here. So, again, this is my first time digesting this, but I like the innovation. I think it really, helps with the urban experience. When I go to cities, I like to see places that I remember and things that are distinctive, and things that are gonna, connect me with that place that I haven't seen somewhere else. So I think that this is a very interesting proposal, and I think it's an interesting location. And when I say interesting, I think it's very intriguing, with respect to what you're trying to accomplish here. One thing I did want to ask with respect to the design, the material that's being used, could you just talk a little bit about, again, for me, because I don't know if I heard that clearly, with respect to the roof, and the material that you're using on the facades of those entryways?
Sure. And Creighton, I might have you talk a little bit about the polycarbonate. You can see
if everybody can hear me, Madam Chair and Commission members, Creighton Petznick with Cleveland Draw. We've been helping Graham and Marika on the project. The materials, so much of the neighborhood art factor and the materials and price point were high in our mind to not only make it a viable project, but fit in with the new work that's going and the new neighbors and the new people who are moving in. The main shell of the building is a pre-manufactured metal building. Graham mentioned it was a Quonset type variety that originated in World War II. These are sectional metal extrusions in Galvalume, which when it shows up and is erected on site, much like an erector set, the economy comes from using the same section over and over again. The material, the Galvalume, much like copper, weathers very nicely to a medium gray. Well, thank you, Mr. Rulin. Sorry about my email. But the polycarbonate and the metal dulls down, so it isn't as bright, but really works with what we think the church and state material palette and the neighborhood. These longhouses were arranged along the West 28th and Church Avenue to create an interesting walking and shopping experience, as well as a live experience for the neighborhood with what's going on. The very top image is of a cultural center in France, but Harvard's art house, a lot of commercial and residential projects are tending towards polycarbonates now because they're energy efficient and they let light, and for the streetscape, let a really beautiful glow out for passerbyers that we've tried to capture to not only bring light, but add something back to the streetscape. The systems that we're using on the top right are an aluminum extrusion system with polycarbonate, which is a sandwich polycarbonate material that adds light and some vision, but also an insulating factor, and presents it in a nice plane that's really attractive in our opinion. The materials below include the True North project, which is from the same manufacturer, Steel Masters. This picture of True North was taken shortly after its completion, but you can see from the samples I'm holding that Galvalume weathers not so bright to present a really nice color that will take on the weather of Cleveland and not be this bright reflective material that you see, but add interest through the ribs. The pictures below that include the cedar siding that has been used on Church and State, with the same very clean line detailing of extrusions at intersections to storefront windows, and the light fixture that's really nice because it's both direct and indirect in a very simple form. So it'll add light not only to the walking surface, but also the curve that's expressed at night. The materials at the bottom of the page relate more to the Detroit facade, including the gooseneck lighting, very traditional form, the white porcelain tile, the tube light storefront assembly that has options available for applied screwed on 7/8 inch metal mutton patterns, which won't look fake because they're in the glass or applied in the back, but they're on both sides of the project. If we want to get more to the Detroit facade, we did do some wall sections on the next sheet that explain it a little more in detail for those materials and how that all goes together.
One other thing I want to just bring up with respect to the kind of the burden that we have to with making these decisions and everything is you have to look at sort of the long term, right? So you look in 20 years, what will this look like, from a design perspective. I like the fact that you talked earlier, Graham, about the use of this as potential live work type of commercial space, so that adaptability is very important. So 20 years from now, we often design to today, right? And we don't think necessarily about, okay, how will this site evolve, or how can these units be rethought if in fact conditions change? So I think we need to be very mindful of that. And I just think that with the size of these, how big are these square footage wise?
It's everywhere from 1,500 square feet.
Okay, 1,500 on the larger end?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay. So just, being mindful, of, how we do design and how we do architecture, so that it's somewhat timeless. The beauty about the whole Landmarks Commission and, the notion of historic preservation, there was a time where things built where the design was timeless. It lasts 100 years. And this is what makes a adaptive reuse project, relevant, because the base architecture was such that, it's like that sport coat, that you can wear for 20 years and it just never goes out of style, and you can rock it with some jeans, So thinking about, how you can make sure that these designs and these land uses are flexible and they can adapt to change, and that you don't get a cool thing today that becomes an eyesore in 20 years. So we have to make sure that we're thinking about those things, and that can be very difficult, particularly in a time where we want innovation, which I think this project, kind of brings that to bear. And the last question that I have for you and your team, you use curves rather than straight lines. Could you guys kind of talk to me about, the difference between why you prefer the curve sort of scenario versus sort of the more modern straight lines?
Yeah, we a number of looking at this site and how we would approach it, and we looked at Barbara Bester's Blackbirds out in LA, and really loved that, and that's much more of a linear approach, but it didn't fit with this site. And there was also a project in Bentonville that we visited in Arkansas that similarly, it was a row of townhouses, and then Austin, Marika will be able to recall the architect, but it didn't feel like it felt too boxy. I think one of the parts is the 1865 building, you've got the arched windows. And so even though you're taking a contemporary approach, you're with these sorts of structures, you're picking up on those same sort of lines, and they almost pop, they accentuate those arched windows on the back of the building where Marika and I call home. That's where we live.
Right.
And I think from a longevity standpoint, even our approach with this service alley is trying to think beyond the auto-centric society that we live in right now, where sure, is there a parallel parking spot for each structure? Yes. Like, could this then get converted into just open green space and merely just be the place where the garbage truck picks up the dumpster? Right. Yeah, that's the real goal. And then even as we think about these as think of purely structural engineering, you've got that ability to say, all right, if you've got a sculptor like John Chamberlain who does twisted metal or did the twisted metal, like the bigger space, we would come in front of the commission again and propose a larger access door, but able to do that with it. So there's those end caps you do get to get addressed if a use needs it, but you're not affecting the overall structure of the building.
And one other thing I like that I think that you showed in the image, and this is something that psychologically I think the commissions and boards are going to have to get used to with how society is beginning to evolve, right? Vehicles obviously are going to change. The electrification of vehicles is going to be it in the next decade, no question, right? I like how you showed the motorcycle in front, right? So instead of parking pads, you have bike pads. People are taking shared mobility devices. Could you be parking one in front of your unit here? If I have a moped, so accommodating those other mobility types, and strictly that we need X amount of parking spaces for these particular units is a different calculus. And I think that's part of what we have to start being more sensitive to as we start to see a different type of product, because it's a different type of user and it's a different type of mentality. And this goes back to the zoning code, with respect to a older sort of Byzantine look at zoning and really not being flexible and adaptable to the changes in lifestyle that's happening right now. So there's a lot of nuances here that I think are, the site lends itself to being just enough to start to introduce some of those things with it not being grossly overbearing.
And I'd always look at the cultural components in and around this neighborhood, be it Spaces Gallery or Transformer Station that the Bidwell Foundation is quarterbacked, and you have a partnership with the Cleveland Museum of Art and the Bidwell Foundation and Fred Bidwell put on front. There was a real, we consistently get asked for spaces that the artists can do larger pieces of fabrication and work. So this is partly a reaction to this, in the last decade, burgeoning microcultural hub, and the interest already from potential users, super conducive to that creative endeavor. So I think it's folks that are growing out of their spaces or want to use do a larger scale approach to work, and it's the fact that you've got this international triennial, which was delayed. So I don't know how you quadrennial would be the new classification, but we've seen that need just consistently build in the last decade.
And you've been working closely, I'm assuming, with the building department and others, because again, this is obviously different types of building approaches and things of that nature. So I think it's an interesting concept, and I think this is something that'll be innovative and kind of revolutionary for the city. So pretty interesting.
Quick note that Secretary Pettit made, which I think is relevant, and I think is very well articulated in an email that he had written me about the concept phases, because this is such a unique site where you have 1980s, you have a 1865, and you have a 2020 building surrounding it, and that the precedent that this would be setting is there's very few places in historic districts that have that
mix
collage of building types and sizes and design. So I would just implore the commission to realize that I don't think this would work in a lot of places, and that's what we racked our brain for years, knowing that we needed this for a staging site for church and state, and continuously going to the brainstorm board and saying, do we like Fester's approach? Do we like what works? And then when we saw this, this feels right, just for this site.
Right. And I'm glad you said that, because that's one thing I try to, even with our team, our staff, is not to get stuck in. And we've had this conversation at planning commission meetings where you have to judge projects on their own merit. I don't believe in getting locked into precedents. Well, you did it here, so why aren't you doing it here? That's a very parochial approach to the world. So for us, we look at things in context and not necessarily if we allow for something like this to occur, then we have to allow for it in this area, in this area, in this area. I've never been into that. So I appreciate you saying that. That's all I have. Thanks a lot.
Madam Chair, we have Mr. Harrison, then we have Ms. Bailey.
Before we go there, I do see that we do have a councilman with us. Mr. Zone, Councilman Zone, are you here to speak on behalf of the project?
I am not. I thought I had something on my calendar. My staff put this on. I think there's a project in Ward 15 somewhere on the agenda.
He heard Director Collier talk about mopeds.
I would like to talk about Grand Visi if I had the opportunity, but no, just kidding.
Okay.
Maurice, can you text me or send me an email if I don't have anything on the calendar? I don't even know why I'm here.
Councilman, we sent you the agenda because we have a report at the end of the meeting about the survey that was done in Ward 15 on West Boulevard by our AmeriCorps member. And we'd love if you can stay to see that, but that's up to you.
I'll stay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to update the list, so we have Mr. Harrison, Ms. Bailey, and Mr. Brunges, who would also like to make a comment.
Okay, let's move on to Mr. Brunges. I believe you had your hand raised first. Just a reminder, this is concept, so we're not going to be voting on this. This is our opportunity for feedback.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize if my audio is not the best, but I will try to be as understandable as possible. I was in attendance at the Design Review Committee meeting, and the vote was 3-1 in favor. The one who voted against had some issues with the fact that they were being asked for final approval rather than concept approval. They didn't feel that they could give a good opinion of this, only having 3 days to look at this. When asked why they were pushing for final approval, the applicant stated that a COVID-related, and I'll say, quote, slow as molasses process. And there's some questions I would like to ask regarding that first.
Slow as molasses on a cold day uphill.
Okay. I will ask, when did you first come up with this concept for this area?
We engaged Graydon last year. We presented to the Block Club originally in, I believe, February. So, we were sharing it with the folks in the community, and I guess the challenge was not going in front of local design review earlier, but this was out there and we had been sharing with people at the city as recently as, I had a meeting with planning department last year about this, showed them the picture. So Matt Moss was in the conference room behind me with the preliminary drawings of this. But I think our challenge was not Mr. Pettit or somebody else from this commission. So I think that was our challenge.
Okay, did you send this to Landmark staff at all for review or feedback before your current presentation?
No, not to my recollection.
Okay, so we've not seen this, and you don't know me because I'm pretty much invisible, and people are finally getting to know who I am, and that as Don's partner in crime there. So I would understand why I don't, but we didn't know anything about this project until you put in for the permit, and we responded within a week to try and get this going. Part of my question is, when did you speak to the media about this project?
Somebody from the city leaked our conceptual sharing of this to Ken Prendergast, and he reached out to me without any outreach from me or Marika or Graydon. So there was somebody at the city in one of the departments that we were soft pedaling this with that then forwarded it on to the media. So the first conversation with the media was a direct result of someone at City Hall sharing our drawings without any of our permission. And we understand that any email correspondence is open to FOIA and become public. So that we acknowledge, but there was no outreach on our part.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, and Director Carlo, that might be something that we have to talk about on level for letting stuff like this get out. So we had no.
Carl, I hope there's sincerity in terms of what Secretary Pettit wrote back with Madam Chair CC'd, and we respect the conceptual point and are looking forward to coming back in 2 weeks.
I do. That's fine. It just, it kind of stuck with me that out of blue, all of a sudden there's an article and we don't know how that happened when we hadn't heard anything about this at any point. And that we should be, especially with something like this, is a brand new concept, we should probably be at the beginning of the process to give you that guidance to show you what's going to be a problem and what's not going to be. Because
and I'll offer an apology that I didn't ask more folks from planning to be involved in that. My meeting with Matt Moss didn't include you, Carl, and didn't include additional invitations. Our mistake.
Yeah, and that happens. It's a learning experience for all of us going forward. So, and it's innovative. I like the idea. It's great. The True North product that you have mentioned here was innovative for them as well, because this was the first the first investment in that area in 40 years, and it was game changing for that area. But it's a different context. We're looking at innovation, but we're also looking. It's not all we look at in a historic district. We have to use appropriateness, and we use the Secretary of Interior standards for that. And specifically, we look at standard number 9, and I'm going to read that just so we have an idea of where this should be. It says, new additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy historic materials, features, or spatial relationships that characterize the property. New work will be differentiated from the old and will be compatible with the historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportion and massing to protect the integrity of the property and its environment. to me, you should be taken from the historic elements. So the fact that you're pulling from church and state as part of your elements, that's not, in my opinion, what you should be drawing from. You should be looking at the historic structures in the area. The gooseneck lighting that you're proposing on the addition, I personally find not appropriate for that. And I think also that there's the metal, I think it's the third time that you've been in front of this commission for the Eagle Hotel building in one phase or another. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact number of times I've been in front of this commission, but it's been numerous, and I appreciate the service of everybody, both on staff and the commissioner.
I would also point out that you currently have a board-on-board fence on the side, on the east facade, correct?
East facade.
Can you show the east facade of the Eagle Hotel building? Above the Schaefer printing? I think you need the site conditions.
Probably slide 5 would be the best. Well.
Okay, yeah, you can't see it, but just above where the flying tiger there, above that, you have the metal railing, or it's supposed to be a metal railing, and it's currently board on board or a privacy fence.
It's board on board that's painted the same color as the brick. Yeah, the approved antique white, I believe. Sherwin-Williams Heritage.
So will you be changing that to the metal railing that you have shown in your rendering?
I don't think I've got anything shown on the rendering that fixed that. But
Can I see the rendering for the east facade of that building? So, no.
I think slide 9.
Slide 9? Okay.
So the elevation.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
That.
Yeah, we do not at this point have a plan to change that just because of the cost that would do it. That's an eventual goal, is to get a cast iron, powder coated black railing.
Okay. So as Don mentioned,
yeah, that's our living room. Yeah, that's our front porch or side porch rather.
So as Don mentioned, we have varying opinions. I like the idea. I think it's transformative, as it was in True North, but I don't know if it is entirely appropriate for this particular area in a historic district. I could see this being put somewhere like in an industrial area, maybe down in the flats. I could see this being plopped somewhere that's lower, that needs development. This could be a Kickstarter for an area that needs development and can have something built around. But in my opinion, I don't think it's appropriate to this location. And based upon everything that we're supposed to do with the standards, I like innovation, but again, it's appropriateness for me. And that's it for me. So thank you.
Can I just say something to that? I would make the argument that this neighborhood is as much of an industrial neighborhood as it is a historic district. It isn't a historic district, but if you're talking about the immediate buildings that are adjacent to this site, most of them are historic industrial buildings that use factory windows, that use industrial architectural forms. So like this site is not immediately adjacent to a number of Queen Anne or Victorian mansions. There are a few blocks away, but there are as many or more industrial factory buildings that have been converted into apartments or that are still being used as factories and industrial uses.
And zoning like industrial right now, for that matter. And I would say that the Rule 9 that you cited, we're abiding by in our approach.
Okay, Madam Chair, we have Mr. Harrison and Ms. Bailey still.
Go ahead, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to say that I enjoyed the colloquial on city planning and modern architectural forms from Director Collier and Mr. Vesey. Thank you very much. That was interesting. And I would say to Director Collier that you said that these boards and commissions need to get used to the fact that, you know, life is evolving and changing. But I'm an historian and I'm concerned with historic architecture, and I sit on the Landmarks Commission, which is charged with protecting the architectural, historical, and neighborhood integrity of historic districts and historic landmarks in Cleveland. So I don't feel like I need to get used to anything really. I really don't like being told to do that. So I just wanted to put that on the record because I sit on this commission, you know, with a great deal of seriousness, and I take the role very, very seriously. So I appreciate what Mr. Brunges said about the Secretary of Interior standards, and always coming back to that because those are a guidepost for his landmarks commissions around the country. Now, having said all of that, I find this a very, very interesting architectural project, and one that reminds me of the port architecture in a way, which is not too far away. If I could, which I think would be that much better, is to make all of these, glad you've landed on this slide, because I think it's important to see the cap ends, these facades. I think they should all be exactly the same, just like you made the roof lines the same. The rhythmic power of that, like what bothers me is the floating portal more than anything. So I'm just asking you to consider making those consistent and placing them in the same place. Otherwise, I like the randomness of the siting, and I am not as bothered perhaps by the distinctive quality of the architecture. I'm not going to say unique because it's not unique, but the distinctive quality of this architectural form being placed in this context. And I think, Marika, you had a very important point that this particular group of blocks here that are adjacent to each other seem to really have all unique forms represented. And one final note, I'm very sad that even 1980s architecture is now being changed, and the glass block we will one day lament no longer exists anywhere. So you have a chance to preserve a great 1980s architecture, and so what do? We put gooseneck lamps on them and change them back to 1920s. And there's probably something to be commented upon there, but I will leave that for others. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to leave this meeting, I'm afraid. So good luck to you with this project, and I look forward to seeing it again when you come before us for a final vote.
Madam Chair, we have Ms. Bailey, and then we also have Mr. Collier with his hand raised.
Go ahead, Ms. Bailey.
As with everyone else on the commission said, this is something unique. I have seen a structure like this that's normally hidden away from the community, and it's an industrial area. So this project is normally going to be used for live and work. And I heard Director Collin mention earlier that in the future, if it's no longer going to be a live and work, that can be converted to commercial. So what I seen was more in an industrial area and it's commercial. It's not somewhere that you live. My one of the few question is the size. I heard the 200, but I couldn't hear. It was so much static. I need the height of it, how long it is, and the width. That's one of my several questions.
Yeah, so the typical height, I'm just pulling up specific. I want to give you the right answer. Marie,
There's two different heights. So the four that are along West 28 are just over 20 feet high, I think 21 feet high, and then the three that are closer to Church and State are slightly lower, so 18 feet high. That's partly to accommodate the second floor of Church and State as well. So those ones are slightly lower. The lengths vary. Graydon probably has those numbers, but
yeah, they range. It's a modular system, so we have 2-foot increments. The longhouses, based on where they are on the site and their view, range from 36 feet long down to 24 feet long.
Ms. Bailey, you
The next question. I'm talking with the mute off, the microphone off. But the next question is, this is Cleveland and snow and all that. So what's the control, because you have a curved roof, what's the control on snow and ice, to prevent injury if someone walks near the structure? What's your control on that?
Part of the landscape approach will be to make sure that nobody is hugging the sidewalls. From if there was any sort of snow slide. So we will be landscaping up against the building so that anything that if you had a snow slide that was with heavy wet snow or anything violent, it would be hurting the lavender and not a human being.
The next question, you explained what type of material you're using. And I heard Director Collar saying that you were working with building and housing. So what came in my mind when I saw this, now that you're making this a living and work, but it doesn't matter because even if it's an industrial commercial, what came in my mind is fire protection. So are you considering and concluding that, for fire protection, especially for the, you have to put polycarbonate material. So just explain on that, how you're going to incorporate fire protection on all the materials for this building.
I could probably speak to that a little better. They are all fully metal buildings, which by the nature of metal are fire resistant. We are taking steps inside to fur out the metal, not only for insulation, but for fire protection, not only the sprinkler system, but also in some cases, 5/8 type X. We would be classified as a type 2 building overall, but we are using some wood inside. So in many ways, this is kind of like a pre-manufactured metal building, like a Butler building, looking at it as type 2. So the approach to these buildings, even though you don't see many Quonset huts, is similar to the type 2 Butler building and the improvements that are in there.
One more question. When I again saw this, it reminded me, although it's individual structure, it reminds me of the efficiency apartment with a high ceiling. What's the occupancy code and maximum that they can go in this building? I'm just curious.
Well, the city does have minimum square footage for each building. residentially in a type in a D zone. That threshold is 950 square feet, which with our second floor lofts does meet that requirement. Each building is slightly different, but we do pass that threshold in terms of it. The open plan is designed basically for the maximum flexibility of the tenant should they care to improve it within.
One more thing, can we go to the site plan? I'm looking at how you having parking and range of 7 units. I noticed you have 7 cars with a vehicle on there, unless you're just using that as a pass by. But you have this small little corner that you're going to use vehicles to turn around. Is there any more ways that you can either widen that or create more of a turning radius in that space? The site, is Maurice there? Yeah. Could you talk more on just the parking? Apparently, the parking is going to be along one portion of the site. And then I noticed at the top portion is an area where you're going to do a turning radius. And so I'm just.
Yeah, we have.
Go ahead.
The issue is just that the site, there's limited space on the site. And we didn't want to sacrifice one of the parking spaces. The way to get a larger turning radius would be to only allow for 6 parallel parking spaces, but that would mean that one of the units doesn't get parking. Otherwise, we just are very limited on the amount of space for the drive lane, and any space that we put into a wider traffic lane means there's less space for the outdoor green space for the residents. We're trying to maximize that part of it and make the traffic turnaround space, which essentially is back of house next to the dumpsters, make that usable, but also as efficient as possible. So that's kind of how we came to that.
We didn't want to, we had explored at one point of, do you have it where there's then an ability to exit off of 28th, and we didn't think that was conducive to kind of an evolving landscape that's not auto-centric. So we wanted to keep the existing apron, and we're actually eliminating a secondary apron that is just to the east of the existing apron that's going to be there. So we're limiting the pedestrian auto conflict zones.
So where the dumpster is, it's not going to actually be a vehicle parked there all the time, right? That's just a diagram just to show you the turnaround, correct? Okay.
7 spaces are the only parking spaces.
Yes.
All right, so no vehicle going to be parking there. All right. All right, because that was one of my comment I was going to make, making the green space smaller, but that's not what you want. You want to try to maximize it as much as you want. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, we still have Director Collier and then Michelle Anderson.
Yes, I'm going to forego. So you can go to Ms. Anderson, and I'd like to speak to the commission members at the end of the agenda. So keep going.
I'd also like to speak. So Ms. Anderson, if you'd like to go, and then I'd like to make some comments also. Go ahead, Ms. Anderson.
Okay, just unmuted. This is a really interesting concept, really interesting idea. I think my hesitation is the location, the massing and materials, especially the kind of lightweight, light form of these buildings are inconsistent with the heavier, mostly masonry, substantial structures, which populated this neighborhood, which is part of the historic fabric. This does not meet that at all. It definitely is in conflict with that. You know, there's a lot of areas of Cleveland which could really use something like this. Unfortunately, I don't think this is the location. It's sort of minimalist, manufactured home meets hoop house kind of, you know, light that it's just not a part of the original construction in that neighborhood. So I just wanted to bring that up. Also, the sizing is not that consistent either with what's going on in that particular block, in that particular community.
I would just implore the commissioner and any other commissioners. I've talked about the uniqueness of this corner, and Alex Frondorf, who's the chair of our block club, who very much of a traditionalist. Few members of the design review committee of Ohio. He's also on the design review committee. They said once they actually stood on that corner, they changed their opinion on this project, because I think they had a lot of the similar reservations that you had, Commissioner Anderson. And as I had mentioned, we've spent now probably 4 or 5 years thinking about this corner and how best to approach it. And it's not just a piece of property that we own, but it's our home. Living up there, it's Marika's 4 months pregnant, and so it's where we're going to raise our child. And for us, it's been a very intentional process to try to find the design that is most appropriate. So I think if you were, or any of the commissioners, if it makes sense to meet out on the site, I think it makes more sense when you see it in context. And I think that's why this vantage point is a really good one, because when you start to think of other things that could go, they actually fit much worse. And it's interesting, I was up on the 6th floor of the church building, and I could see the hoop houses of the Ohio City Farm from there. And so, I hadn't thought about that until you mentioned the hoop houses, but you've got those within eye shot as you're looking out with the largest contiguous urban farm in America. But that wasn't the motivating factor. The motivating factor was the sculptural approach, and the lightness, I think, on the end caps is a note. I don't feel like the ribbed nature of this is that light. I don't have that same interpretation with regards to lightness, but that's where this is definitely subjective.
I think one thing that a number of the members of the local design review committee and our block club mentioned, just as I guess a counterpoint to the feedback that the massings or the scale doesn't fit with the context, is almost I guess considering that in a positive sense, that this neighborhood is very quickly getting built up with a number of really dense projects. You have a 5-story building going in right across the street right now. There's going to be another probably 5-6-story building going in across the street the other way, across Church. This neighborhood is getting very dense, and this site, one thing that we were interested in was kind of seeing this corner as something to provide something a little bit more, a little bit of breathing room, I guess, where you have space between the buildings, you have green space, you have trees, you have the ability for plantings. You're not building up every square inch of this neighborhood into large scale buildings that are at a much larger massing. So I think that was actually something that we were kind of contemplating as a positive, is that this could be a little bit of a respite from the very high dense buildings that are going to be flanking most corners of this neighborhood in a couple of years.
And the neighborhood, the block club, just to give some 21 votes in support and 1 abstention. So there was no objection. So the people who live in this neighborhood, who are stewards of the various buildings and homes in this historic district, 21 votes in support and 1 abstention, but no objection.
So I think I'd like to just make some comments because I think the conversation has been wonderful. It's covered many of the feedback that I wanted to give, but a few things that, just to reinforce or to bring forward to new comments. I think it is very intriguing. I am struggling a little bit with not seeing more of the context. I have looked on Google Earth, so I know the area fairly well, but it's always nice to see it in context. I think the interesting thing is something you just brought up is the scale of the buildings that are going in around it, but the direct neighbors are in the 1 stories. So, a weird comment is back to what Carl mentioned is trying to meet the urban form, although the look can be different, but the urban form, rhythm, scale. Can I ask why you chose to put the 1-story structures on the interior of this site versus adjacent to your 1-story building that you're restoring?
The slide that I would pull up just to address that would be slide 8, because you can see the different heights relative to those buildings. So I don't. Sure, they're 2 stories, but that single story is a tall single story or taller single story. And we felt that the what's labeled as 1A in the drawing, it draws folks in. So if you're walking east on Church Avenue, you're going to see that topography with that 1A building. So your sight lines are such where you're drawing folks into the commons. You're having an event like that. So you're not losing the 6 other structures that are around it and masking it. So it's to preserve that sort of sight line. I think that sculptural quality I mentioned a number of times that we're really enticed by. You can see that ribbed range, if you will. And I know we're still in the render, but I don't see a huge, again, it's not like they're twice as high as the single story. They're the 1A compared to the 7E. Yes, it's a different height, but it's not half of 7E's height. And the same is true as the 2 stories, not twice as high as the Pizza and Flying Tiger building.
Just to clarify, they're all 2 stories with the exception of 1 building. So the only difference is a slight height change to accommodate the 2nd floor windows of Church and State. So they're not, it's not, the 3 against the building are not 1 story. They're all 2 story with the exception of we've been contemplating adding a mezzanine on that also and making that a 2 story.
It's just the scale. I think that is you're now going to have more 5 stories, but you do have this sort of unique 1 story that is the project we just saw prior, that is across the street, the Pizza Tiger building, as you call it, and then the restaurant that's just south of this. So I just think to introduce it on the interior of the site, to me, feels more awkward than appropriateness. I am also struggling with the, I won't say asymmetrical, but less structured layout, just because once again, when you look around this neighborhood, it's a regimented, structured configuration of buildings, both modern and historic. So I personally wouldn't mind seeing it a little bit more structured, at least along the perimeters. because I think that's something that would help it blend better. I won't say blend from it's never going to blend from an architectural, but from a planning area or planning approach. I am on the fence like Miss Anderson I do really like this project. I'm very familiar with the project in Bentonville, Arkansas. But similar to their architecture, I am on a personal struggle of haven't made my decision. Their architecture is all over the board.
Yeah, I wouldn't advocate for Bentonville en masse at all. But
yeah, they're historic district, and then they have row houses, and they have modern, and there's no uniformity or thread. I'll say not uniformity, but thread that ties it all together to maintain the district. And that's my hesitation of this project. Like I said, this is the first time we've seen it. I did see it, a day or so ago. As you mentioned, Mr. Pettit did forward it to me. But that's my personal struggles. I don't want to recreate something that they have created down there where, we look at the project in itself, not as a district. Because I do really like your approach. I do feel what's already said is that this could be would be very, very appropriate in transition areas, more in Detroit Shoreway or South Edgewater, or those areas that are the industrial and residential mixed together. So that's my personal thing, is that the site I am struggling with and not seeing the context of what is actually around it in more detail beyond what I can see on Google Earth, to remind myself of the new projects that are going up in Franklin Circle, the new project that is going up, the Snavely development, the Church and State, and then where the rest of the residential really is in this area, because it is further to the west, but we're taking the scale of the residential and now putting it in the middle. So those, like I said, I'm all over the board, but those are my personal comments about this. And then the Commons, I do think the Commons is a great incorporation here, because we're losing even more of the green space with all of these larger developments. The lawns, we're holding the street front, which is great, but we're losing that green space. So I do like the Commons. I would encourage you to continue to study that to see if you can make it larger. And like the Church and State, they have created a community space, or you have created community space there, but it's still a hardscape. So having areas that are a respite, if not ones that you can go into visually, that the community can take part in, like the lawn or the space that is in the Detroit project, I just lost its name, at least gives people some respite of visual relief from what is now developing in this area. And then this is my architect's hat going on. I would just encourage you to study or talk to your trash supplier to see if they can actually get a truck back there. Because if you have cars parked in there, I don't know if they'll actually service you. So it may.
We've walked the site with Rumkey.
Okay, because it's a tight little area there, and with building and cars on both sides, is there any other place that could be appropriate that then could once again open up more space? I do really like the green Crete pavers, because I believe that's what you said they were, the green Crete, because I think that does give you that flexibility, is that if there are no cars, then it can be an extension of the green space. So that's my initial feedback.
Thank you. I think the one kind of as you made reference to the Cohash building, and that even has a unique, you've got the single story, and then you get the big box component of it. So you do have that lack of uniformity even on that site. And for the site, if you're looking at Google Earth right now, and I don't even know if it's updated, but the quarter phase 2, which is the 5-story brick structure, which I think is an elegant evolution from the first quarter building. It's so any influence that this commission had on that design is welcome. It's something that we look out to. But what they didn't do is they didn't wrap the building down 28. And so you don't have then again that massing along 28 that you'd expect. It's just facing on Detroit. And I think I know that Pete Snavely, it was really cautious. They did not invest in underground parking. It's all surface lot. So when you've got the Rex building surface parking lot, this is a nice then step up back to the church building.
We can bring some additional context photos, I think, for the next time.
Yeah,
definitely.
So on the point of the that Commissioner Trott was making, originally we did not have the traffic line with parking at all. But just from feedback from our block club and from neighbors, we felt that, especially with the city eliminating parking on West 28th Street as part of its resurfacing project, and there's a lot of neighbors that are angry about that evolution. We felt that being able to provide at least one street space for each longhouse was a good compromise. So that was kind of one of the evolution strategies that we took. So it did end up shrinking the common space a bit, but we thought that being able to provide that flexible residence probably.
Thanks for that response. Are there other commission member questions or comments, or shall we go back to Mr. Collier?
We have no other hands raised at this time.
Mr. Collier?
Oh, excuse me, I take that back, Ms. Bailey.
No.
Sorry, I had to turn off the computer and turn it back on. There's no demolition on where the units is going to be at, correct? This is open space.
Yeah, it's a calling it extended to be generous.
I didn't hear your response.
I think calling it a gravel parking lot would be generous. You've got some moon-like craters and top of it's a parking lot, but it's not one that you'd want to bring any new car on.
No, that's fine, because I saw one of the site plan. It looks like it was a structure there, but that's why I asked that question. All right, thanks. Director, you can take the lead.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to go on record in response to a comment that was made earlier, that as the Landmarks Commission and as our boards and commissions, we often are faced with some difficult decisions with respect to proposals that we get, and staying true to the fidelity of what it is that we're tasked to do. Obviously, this project is no different, and I believe that as we move into the future, it's going to get even more challenging, particularly when we see intriguing and innovative projects like this, and having to make that call on their appropriateness in districts like this. But I do want to say, I just think it's important that we, honor the various perspectives that we bring to the table. We have very talented, capable individuals on the boards and commissions with their expertise, and I value the expertise of individuals on this board. There are also alternative perspectives on the board, and I just want to be certain that board members are clear that position or those perspectives are heard and honored by myself and our department and this administration, which is part of the reason why you guys are here to continue the work that you're doing to protect the integrity of these districts. But I do want to just say, any comments that are made about a particular case are the perspectives of that individuals who is making the comment. My commentary earlier on is something that I was very sincere about and I meant. And I think that there is some challenges that we're going to have to face with decision-making as the world evolves. And this is something that I've commented to Planning Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, et cetera. We're in an adaptation scenario right now. And part of the challenge that we face is making sure that we honor the past and also embrace the future, which is can be difficult. You know, so whether you're a historian or you're coming at it from a different angle, I think the common ground here is that we have to figure out how to do that. And that is not a slam dunk proposition at all times. And when you get projects like this, it takes some deliberation. And I just think that everyone's position about these projects should be honored. And no one should take offense to the various perspectives that people offer. And I just think that, you know, overall, if we can accomplish anything if we accept responsibility together and figure it out together. So I just want to just provide that commentary and to just wanting everyone to know that these are various perspectives and that we should not take offense when perspectives are given. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. With that, if there's no other comments from the commission to the applicant, you know, since this was a conceptual, and we appreciate you understanding why we wanted you to come at for concept, because that is our requirement. I know we're very lenient to try to help everyone try to get through the process, but ours is truly to do concept first in front of landmarks and then come back for final so that you can have the opportunity to hear our feedback and improve it. Final is more reflective of the commission's desires versus you hearing it final, and then we're at conflict because projects do go too far often. So thank you for your flexibility. Do you feel you've received the feedback from the commission and understand our perspectives?
Very much, and appreciate the suggested considerations, and we will huddle as a design team to address all of them, if not by altering the drawings, but giving logic and rationale, and always looking to that Department of Interior set of guidelines. It really is, as I sit in the building that dates back to 1854, Ohio City Firehouse, take very seriously the stewardship of a landmark like this, the 1855 building, the 1919 building, the Strawberry Block. So we celebrate the potpourri, landmarks and design and building types, and I think that the mission of this commission is so vital, because this building most likely would not still be in existence if it were not for organizations and people who are volunteering their time like you all. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for the time to review this, and we look forward to seeing you come back here in the near future. So with that, then we will, if there's nothing else, then we'll conclude our concept plan review, and we'll move on to our reports. Okay, so we have one report today, and I'll hand it back to Mr. Pettit or Don, are you giving us the background on this, or is it Ms. LaPlaca?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to point out that for the past 10 years, the Commission has enlisted an AmeriCorps member to survey one or more historic neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland. This year, we were privileged to have Julia LaPlaca, who surveyed a section of West Boulevard. It's an existing historic district that was never properly documented when we designated it almost 20 years ago. And today is her last day with us, and she's here today to present her findings and her survey report, and to also talk about some of the other buildings she documented for the Ohio History Connection.
Hello, can everybody hear me and the sound is okay?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. All right, we can go ahead to my first slide. Well, hello, Landmarks Commission. It's been a fun year, if unexpected year in some ways. I'm going to keep this pretty brief. I've actually given, oh, are we getting feedback from anything? Anyway, just holler at me if something goes funky. But as I was saying, I've given this information a couple of different times. I ended up having a pretty close working relationship with the block club in my survey area. So I presented to them both virtually and in person in the backyard of one of the members. So just a little bit more about myself. My name is Julia LaPlaca. I actually just got married, so my last name is about to be married, so my name is different. And I decided to work in the West Boulevard neighborhood. I know you guys have heard these presentations before, but I'll just give you a quick background about what AmeriCorps is. So I'm technically serving the Ohio History Service Corps, which is underneath the big umbrella of AmeriCorps. So Don was my supervisor here. I also had a supervisor in Columbus at the Ohio History Corps. My particular title is community surveyor. The community surveyor is required to survey at least 100 properties in Cleveland. There's another one of me in the Ohio History Service Corps in Cincinnati. So there were 2 of us this year, as well as 8 other members of the Ohio History Service Corps doing other history-related projects. But there were only 2 of us working in municipalities. So that's what the program is, and it is really great that Cleveland has been a partner for so long. It means that the program is robust and it works like a well-oiled machine. We were able to successfully navigate switching from being in the office to being at home, and it all went pretty well, and that's a testament to the Landmark staff. Next slide. So a little bit about the district. I'm going to go ahead and give you a little history about the neighborhood, and then I'll share what I learned about it as a result of the survey, explaining a couple of procedural things along the way. So I surveyed this highlighted area in the Clifton and West Boulevard Historic District. It ended up being 120 buildings because I wanted to do the entirety of the original subdivision called the West Boulevard allotment. So this was a very carefully planned neighborhood. The bonds were released in 1906, and it has maintained pretty good historical integrity. Not too much has changed. Basically, the boundaries are in the north, Madison Avenue, and then in the south, Lorraine Avenue. And the historic district consists of only those buildings facing the boulevard. The original allotment went to a little bit toward 103rd and toward 101st Street. So it was a little bit wider, but those buildings on either side are not as fabulous as the ones on the boulevard. So next slide. Just to give you a little bit of a peek as to kind of what it looks like. This Sanborn map shows the northern portion of the survey area. Actually, the Sanborn map natural lines show the entirety of how far the original subdivision extended toward the west and the east. All of the buildings that I surveyed were residential, just 1 or 2 family homes, except in the blue box, West Boulevard Christian Church, and in the green box, the West Boulevard apartment building, and then a storefront on Madison Avenue. Next slide. For those of you who are not familiar, I completed an Ohio historic inventory sheet for each building within the survey area. This asks for all kinds of information, foundation material, when it was built, a little bit about maybe the history of the residents, what kind of windows there were. And I got this information from the records office, mainly looking at permits, which is always exciting, going into the records room. And then also physical observation of the buildings, as well as other online resources like archives or ancestry.com, county records, etc. So I did one of these for each building. And this particular form is generated by the SHPO's database. So that's why it looks pristine now. The state generated it. Next slide. Just a little bit, we'll blitz through the history of West Boulevard. This is a historic photograph from BZA's files. Next slide. All right, so we're looking at a historic map from 1852. The original survey area land was owned by Leonard Case, no surprise there. Next slide. Sorry, Maurice, I'm going fast.
No problem.
Okay, we'll spend tiny bit more time on this one. This is an 1898 map, and I just want to point out that where West Boulevard will be is not subdivided yet, but the surrounding areas are. And this is important. This land is going to be set aside to be used by the Cleveland Parks Commission. So, but even before the parks kind of took over this land, we can see that it is a good place for a special street to be constructed. There are already 2 streets, and you can see from this modern overlay that this is where West Boulevard is going to be. Margaret Street, and I think Greg Street and Laura Street. These were both ancestors. No, other way around. These were relatives, younger relatives in the Case family. So when Case Sr. and Case Jr. died, the land was split up, and the old street names reflect that old ownership. But you can see Madison Avenue is a natural northern border, as is Lorraine in the south. Next slide. Okay, so now we get to the fun part, the parks and parkways of Cleveland. So as many of you know, around the turn of the century, Cleveland, like many other cities, decides that they want to combat urban overcrowding with the ideals of the city beautiful as promulgated by Daniel Burnham and his ilk. So this is the idea of, grandiose Beaux-Arts architecture and wide expanses, beautiful vistas where you can see a lot of green within an urban landscape. And Cleveland decides to tackle this by campaigns like the Group Plan in 1903 and by developing parkland. So originally the city of Cleveland wanted to have a quote unquote chain of verdure that would be parkways and boulevards that would connect all of the parks around the city. And West Boulevard was going to be part of this. So that is, you can see the highlighted area, that's where West Boulevard is. And it originally was going to be part of a connector between Edgewater Park and Brookside Park in the south. This did not happen. Right by Brookside Park, now where the zoo is, there has always been railroad tracks there. There has been an industrial complex there, and it was not realistic to be able to just slap some parkland in the middle of that. So it didn't happen. But West Boulevard was developed, and its maintenance was overseen by the Parks Commission for many years. So the boulevard was built, and the earliest owners were subjected to very specific deed restrictions because they were a boulevard neighborhood. Next slide. So in 1906, the bonds are released for the West Boulevard allotment. And this is a really cool historical map that the engineering department gave me. At some point, someone went in and wrote in the names of the current owners. I think the owners were maybe the 30s, which was kind of a weird, for some reason, someone thought that they should write down all the people who currently lived on these properties at this moment. And so now I have this map, which actually ended up being really useful as I was tracing property ownership. So, but it shows what the allotment consisted of. And again, my survey area was just those things facing the boulevard, not the commercial strip on Lorraine. And all of the plots and the selling and buying was overseen by the West Boulevard Realty Company. Next slide. This was maybe the most fun little rabbit hole I went down. I have a background in art history and visual culture, so I was intrigued by the advertisements for the West Boulevard allotment that were released, between 1904, kind of leading up to the, big release, 1906. They opened up the plots for sale and on July 4th, and then kind of into the 19-teens. Here we have the West Boulevard allotment personified as a Ben-Hur figure. With this quadruped, galloping into the future, leaving these, landlords in the dust. So we can see that these advertisements are targeting first-time likely homeowners who want to get out of the city, out of their apartment building, and into their own home. In America, one of the key connectors between wealth and success for the future is home ownership. So we can see the seeds of that already starting to blossom in the early 20th century. Next slide. Just another little example. Here's another cool advertisement, this time with some pictures. This is a testament to how these houses have been they've stayed pretty consistent over the years. We can see both of the houses depicted in I believe this is from the Cleveland Press advertisement. These are photographs that I took, in 2019. And you can immediately recognize, oh yeah, that is that house. This is an early advertisement, and these two houses were some of the earliest built in the neighborhood, so it makes total sense that they would be depicted. If you notice at the bottom of the advertisement, there's a lot of empty space still in the boulevard. So this is a little snapshot into that intermediate time of development. Next slide. One thing I tracked was year of construction so that I could visually see kind of when how this neighborhood grew. And we can see that the height of construction was in 1915, and really it's between 1910 and 1919 where almost all the houses are built. There are reports in the Parks Commission annual reports that they had to keep repaving West Boulevard from the sheer amount of construction equipment just driving up and down it all the time. So thick and fast, the neighborhood gets built. Next slide. One of the other things I tracked was how many houses were built by certified Cleveland architects. And in this regard, I was, Carl and Don helped me all throughout this process. But in particular, I would send any pictures and information I found about a house that I could connect to a known Cleveland architect, and Carl added them to the Cleveland Architects database and is continuing to add them. So I found out that of the houses that I could find permits, could figure out this information, 18.3% were built by architects. This kind of makes sense because people who wanted to own something on the boulevard had to spend at least $3,000 on their house, so they might be more willing to shell out for an architect. And they also had to, be careful with what they built. The setbacks are very far because of there are double plantings on either side of the street to really make it very green and verdant. You couldn't plant flowers in certain parts of the front yard. You couldn't put up a fence. There were these restrictions because the boulevard was supposed to be special. This connector that a Cleveland motorist could zip up and down and enjoy the trees as they went from Edgewater to Brookside Park. Next slide. Just a couple of examples of some architect-built homes. Maurer and Mills at 2036. This house was actually recently renovated, so maybe some of you remember that one. And then one of the few Queen Anne's on the street, built by Griebel. The original residents of the Griebel house he was a railroad manager. And then in the Nally house, Mr. Nally was a lawyer. Next slide. Another fun little piece of Cleveland history hiding on West Boulevard is a Marquardt house. You might remember Marquardt constructed all of the houses on Newton Avenue, now a National Register district and a local district. Marquardt also built this house. And you can see some of that signature style that he's known for, these, elaborate window surrounds made out of this, this handcrafted wood that Marquardt specialized in. And this is a corner double on on Western and West Boulevard. Anyway, next slide. Another fun house, also architect built by William Markowitz. He was also an architect of a synagogue in Cleveland, and actually another house on the street. Something fun about this house, the original owner was a Hungarian gentleman. He went back to Hungary, married his second wife, but she was not allowed to leave the country because the Iron Curtain was coming down. And so he left, and then 5 years later, his wife joined him, and she was one of the first of 5 people to leave the country since it was taken over, and their reunion made the newspaper. So that was kind of fun to discover. Next slide. Some results of the survey. Besides tracking, when things were built, I also kept tabs on the styles. By far the most, all of these houses, almost all these houses are vernacular. There are very few examples of really high styles. By far the most common style are vernacular houses with colonial revival elements. There's a few modern houses that were built, kind of post 1930, One Cape Cod, that sort of thing, and a few others, but for the most part, we're looking at big, this kind of big Cleveland duplexes, and most of them are colonial revival. Next slide. Just some examples. You can see that, this is beautiful residential architecture. I've been in a few of these houses and they have really beautiful wood interiors and built-ins as well. Something I also tracked was, besides architects, also contractors. There's a lot of common contractors, which makes sense when you think about how quickly the neighborhood was developed. If you were going to buy a plot on West Boulevard, you might as well hire a contractor who's already working on the street. So all three of these houses were built by the same contractor. All three of them had connections to one family. So Elsie and William Geiger had a house built for their parents next door, and a brother across the street. They worked in real estate, and you can tell that they're like, oh yeah, everyone in the family wants to live nearby, and we're all going to use the same contractor. And I traced some of those stories as I was going through the permits and gathering the data. Next slide. However, one of maybe the biggest change to this neighborhood, and I should say, as I've said before, it's really been quite consistent. There's been a consistent number of 1 and 2 family houses. That hasn't really changed. But of course, the biggest change was the construction of Interstate 90. So in this Sanborn map, anything in between the black lines was taken out to construct I-90. There were 23 houses demolished on West Boulevard alone. I did not track the ones on the adjacent blocks. One of the interesting things I discovered in these little gray boxes on the west side of the street are two locations of a program that the Highway Department instituted called the Relocation Assistance Office, or something like that, where they set up shop, and people in Cleveland who were going to be, who had to move out of their house because of the highway, could go in and get moving funds from the state. And those were allocated based on how many rooms, if they were furnished, and if you were a business, you could get a little bit more money. And all of that, that happened on West Boulevard. That's where they had one of their field offices. Next slide. So here we can see some of the members of that relocation program on a porch on West Boulevard. And there's a very fun I shouldn't say fun. There's an informative Plain Dealer article that talks about the metal file boxes being next to the beautiful inlaid wood cupboards as these people take over these houses. Of course, the relocation office just set up shop in 2 houses that would be demolished, so they no longer exist. This portion of I-90 was some of the last to be completed in Cleveland. Mostly this was because of budget constraints and people in Lakewood being mad about where a marginal road was going to go. But it was about 17 years from start to finish, which is a really long time for people to have to live with varying states of construction and deconstruction in their neighborhood. Next slide. I'm going to just quick go through. So that was, I don't want to totally end on a sad note with West Boulevard. West Boulevard is still beautiful. In 1999 and between 1999 and 2000, it became a historic district. And the people who I've met who live on the street have so much, they're really engaged. I benefited greatly from a super robust block club spearheaded by the incomparable Sue Zimmerman. I don't know if maybe Councilman Zone probably knows her, but she was my greatest advocate, and I ended up presenting 3 times to the block club, once at the beginning of the project, once at the end, twice at the end, and have been giving individual homeowners their OHI form about their house and copies of the survey report. I wrote the survey report with that readership in mind, so it's a little bit friendlier than previous survey reports. I tried to steer clear of anything too technical because I knew the block club would be reading it. So that's West Boulevard. It ended up being such a great community to study, and I learned so much about city history and development. The other part of the community surveyor role is to complete 10 National Registry questionnaires or local landmark nominations. This is the first baby step of paperwork on the long and arduous road that one must travail if you are to get something on the National Register of Historic Places or a Cleveland landmark. So this is just, to maybe get the ball rolling someday. I'll blitz again through these projects, and then I'm happy to answer questions at the end. Next slide. The first project I worked on was connected to West Boulevard. This is north of my survey area. This is a bridge by Charles Schweinfurth, a well-known Cleveland architect who designed many, many bridges for the city of Cleveland. This one, surprisingly, not a landmark yet or on the National Register of Historic Places. So I did some of the preliminary paperwork for that. Next one. My next project was the Lake Avenue Railroad Bridge. And this NRQ and landmark nomination, I worked with a community partner who lives by the bridge, and she and her neighbors have been advocating for this bridge for years, reaching out to the railroad company to ask them to take better care of it and the city. And they are also passionate about its history. And I was connected to them through one of the city planners and ended up writing the documentation with a community member. So we did it all together, shared the labor, and now there's actually a public art project that's scheduled to be on some of those kind of the side parts of the bridge. Anyway, they're a really great West Side community as well. Next slide. I also wrote a National Register questionnaire for the Euclid Beach Gate, a well-known Cleveland landmark. Not too much to say about that one. Next slide. And I worked on the Beachland Ballroom. So this is an example of some mid-century modern architecture, which I know SHPO is interested in encouraging community surveyors to do a little bit more of this, as these buildings are reaching their 50-year birthday, the big one for historic structures. The Beachland Ballroom began its life as the Croatian Liberty Home, which is a federation of Croatian immigrants who banded together to share community space, put money in a common pot for funeral expenses and that sort of thing. It began its life as a Croatian home, and now it's a really cool music venue. Would recommend when you can go to shows again. Try a Beachland. Next slide. Fine. This one is maybe the project I enjoyed the most. I think it's a shoe-in for a landmark or a National Register building. Some of you might be familiar with the Bodies, a husband and wife duo who ran a recording company from their house and backyard studio. They converted an old dairy building and garage into a studio, and they ran a recording company for 40 years on Union Avenue in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. The house is still standing. Thomas passed away in 2006, but his wife Louise still lives in the house. They no longer are using the studio, though. Western Reserve Historical Society has some of their archives, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame might too. There's quite a lot written about them, actually, but not much has been done about the house. So I really hope that this house and the outbuildings are preserved. They really deserve to be a landmark. These people overcame tremendous obstacles in order to do what they do, and they literally gave a voice to a lot of people who would not have had a voice in Cleveland. Next slide. Finally, to return to West Boulevard, these two houses ended up becoming important because they were owned by the Coast Guard for many years. The Coast Guard purchased two houses on West Boulevard to use as residence for Cleveland's lighthouse keepers or lightkeepers. So 4 lightkeepers and their families lived in these duplexes on West Boulevard for about 20, 30 years. And then afterwards, the Coast Guard used them as guest houses for the 9th Coast Guard District headquarters that's in Cleveland. So I also wrote an NRQ for these. Very interesting history. Next slide. Especially about these lightkeepers. So the lightkeepers were heroic folks. They originally lived in a beautiful mansion by their old Victorian lighthouse. Now only the steps of it are visible on, I think, West West or East 9th Street, can't remember, in the warehouse district. But that's all that's left of that original beautiful residence and lighthouse. Next slide. And here is Mr. Perry, who was a longtime headlight keeper in Cleveland, who lived on West Boulevard. And the image on the right that says, "Sure, his trumpet's worn," is from a Plain Dealer article in response to people complaining about the foghorn. So the foghorn was going off all the time because of the smog generated by Cleveland, the city, and not by fog. And it was really loud and people were annoyed. And the Plain Dealer wrote this piece that said, in essence, "This is the sound of industry. We need the lighthouses and the foghorn to keep us safe so that we can transport our goods. Calm down. We like the lighthouses and the light keepers." And here's a very sweet picture of Mr. Perry watering the lawn in front of his West Boulevard house. I had a lot of time researching the heroic antics of the light keepers in Cleveland. Next slide. Finally, I made sure to document some of my work on Clio, which is similar to Cleveland Historical, except that it's bigger than just Cleveland. It's a nationwide online platform for history. It's map-based, so you can kind of see a historic site, click on it, and be like, oh, this is what happened here. And I did that for some of the things I worked on West Boulevard so that the information would be accessible in a user-friendly way on the internet, both for residents or just for posterity. It's kind of nice to have things not just tucked away in the Landmarks Records Office, but in a way that anyone can access. Next slide. And that is it for me. Thank you for letting me talk your ear off and for letting me have a really privileged front row seat into how cities work, how history is preserved at a municipal level. I've learned a lot. I have no historic preservation training. I didn't before this. And I'm off to an art history PhD next year. But I found your work really inspiring. I hope to sit on some kind of board myself someday, just because I realize how important the work is. And I'm really thankful for the experience. So thank you. Thank you very much. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I also realize you might want to go back to your lives.
Thank you, Ms. Napaka. That was truly very interesting and history that I wasn't personally aware of. So thank you. That's wonderful to hear, and obviously shows your tremendous passion and hard work related to this. So good luck in your next adventures. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, we have Councilman Zone and Adrian Bailey with comments.
Go ahead, Councilman Zone.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Julia, thank you for taking us down a walk down memory lane. I lived on this street for many years. I lived 2 doors north of Sue Zimmerman at 2084. You showed the house several times. It just warmed my heart. I love that home. And in fact, the very first meeting to establish the historic district was held in my home when I was just a resident. And Alan Dreyer was in attendance, so Alan can give you his perspective on that meeting. Bob Kaiser was the secretary of the Landmarks Commission, and Tom Yablonsky lived directly across the street from me. He still lives there. There's so much rich history on that street, and I'm so appreciative. I did want to just underscore a terrible mistake that our city did several years ago, which prompted me to oppose a former colleague of mine who de-landmarked one parcel out of the landmark district, and you showed it right there on the southwest corner of West Boulevard in Detroit. It's now a dirt parking lot that's owned by Westtown Development Corporation, and I really would love to see that parcel get put back into the landmark district to complete what the community really set out in terms of protecting and saving those properties. I would love if you could send to me any information you have about 2084, the Geiger House would be wonderful, and such a beautiful presentation. And Madam Chair, this was wonderful to sit through a whole commission member meeting. I appreciate what each and every one of you done. 3 hours only to get on the agenda, so I know that you work really hard, and I appreciate what all of you do. So I don't know. I know Adrian had her hand up, but if Alan Dreyer is still on the call, if you want to just give any perspective about our meeting and the process to establish the historic district.
Thank you, Councilman Zone. Julie, I really enjoyed your presentation. You know, just driving up and down West Boulevard, going to Edgewater Park, you know, I just really love those beautiful homes. But I really like the presentation part when you mentioned when they built the 90 highway and some of the homes were destroyed. Now, I see it's hard for me to hear. So I wanted to know, when you say relocation, did they only provide the funds to the homeowners, or did they give them an opportunity to relocate physically their home to a location of choice?
I don't believe that there was any moving of buildings. The state purchased the homes and then offered, you know, if you want, we can also help with your moving expenses to kind of soften the blow. But I didn't get the impression that residents had much of a choice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, while there's a lot of research about, you know, the kind of Shaker Lakes East Side Highway, the West Side Highway I think is a little under researched. Maybe I just couldn't find it. But you know, someone with better city planning and history qualifications than me should tackle it someday, because I think there's probably a lot there.
Okay. Well, once again, Julia.
Madam Chair, we have no other hands raised. Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Left-handed is not always easy. Thank you again for your presentation. I think that was wonderful. Don, is there any motion or anything that we need to do with this report, or is it just for information only?
It's strictly informational. We will follow up with the proposed nominations in the future. So you may see them at the commission for action, but otherwise, we're just here to say thanks to Julia and to wish her well in the future.
It was an excellent presentation. Excellent.
Thank you.
Councilman Zone's hand is raised. I'm not sure if that was from earlier.
No, I put it back up. Thank you, Maurice. Mr. Chair, Madam Chairwoman, and Mr. Pettit, it would be wonderful if this full presentation could be emailed to Councilman Brian Mooney and myself. There are some properties that Julie talked about that touch his ward, and that bridge right there at Desmond and West Boulevard, between Desmond and Baltic, definitely needs to get on the register. And I would definitely follow up with him, and then I would consider maybe even the planning department thinking about how to re-engage so we can move to consider adding that parcel out in Detroit and West Boulevard back into the historic district as well, would be my recommendation.
I already have a recording of a longer version of this spiel that I'm happy to send to you, and then you can click through to whatever is pertinent in it.
And Don, can you make sure she also has Councilman Mooney's email address to be included?
I'll make sure she has that contact.
Excellent. Okay, so once again, Julia, good luck in your next adventures. I wish you well, and I know obviously by this you'll do wonderful things. Moving on to meeting minutes. It does not look like we have any today. Any administrative reports? We're on to adjournment. I like it. All
yes, right. I have no report.
Okay. Would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Mr. Pettit, please take call. Roll call.
Miss Anderson,
Yes.
Miss Bailey,
Yes.
Director Collier,
Absolutely.
Mr. Dryer,
Yes.
Mr. Harrison,
Emphatically, yes.
Mr. Strickland,
Yes.
Mr. Tarasik. I don't know if he's still here, but I'll take that as a yes. Ms. Pratt,
Yes,
we are adjourned.
we are. Excellent. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll see you in 2 weeks at our next meeting.
Thank you. Get well soon.